My name's Lucas. I'm 28, and 2 weeks ago my phone buzzed with a message that made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly out of touch that I had to sit down before reading it again. It was from my sister, Mia, who's 26 and getting married in a month. The message wasn't a casual save the date or a sweet note about how excited she was. Nope. It was a link to a PDF titled Wedding Gift List, Mandatory. I thought it was a joke at first, until I opened it and saw what she was requesting. A new car. She had actually specified the make and model, a white Audi Q5, a down payment for an apartment in the city, and 3 separate designer bags that cost more than my monthly rent combined. And under each item, she had written priority in big, bold letters. I sat there staring at my phone, part amused and part irritated. Mia and I have never had the easiest relationship. Growing up, she was always the golden child, the one my parents bent over backwards for, the one who got a brand new car at 18 while I drove the family's hand-me-down that barely started in winter. I'd worked my way through college, paid off my own student loans, and was finally starting to build a little savings cushion. Mia, on the other hand, still lived with my parents until last year and jumped from job to job without ever really paying rent or bills. So seeing her ask me, not our parents, but me, to buy her an apartment, it made my stomach turn. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit overnight, hoping maybe I'd misread the tone or that there'd be a follow-up text saying, "Ha, just kidding." But no. The next day, she sent a follow-up message that read, "Hey, just making sure you saw my list. We need to start arranging things so everything's ready by the honeymoon. We're counting on you." Counting on me. Like this was some kind of family duty, not a massive financial commitment she had no right to demand. That's when I texted back, "Mia, I'm not buying you a car or an apartment. I'll get you something off a normal registry, but I'm not spending tens of thousands of dollars on this." Her reply came almost instantly, like she'd been sitting there waiting for me to answer. "Wow, are you serious? You're my brother. This is what family does. If you're not willing to step up, then don't even bother coming to the wedding." I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding a little harder than I expected. It wasn't even disappointment I felt. It was a weird mixture of relief and anger. Relief because I'd always felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells with Mia, trying to keep the peace. Anger because this was her true colors showing, and she didn't even hesitate to use the wedding as leverage to get what she wanted. I didn't reply. I figured maybe she'd cool down, or our parents would talk some sense into her. Instead, my phone started lighting up with calls. First from my mom, then from my dad. When I finally picked up, my mom launched right in. No hello, no asking how I was. "Lucas, I just got off the phone with Mia. She's crying. She says you told her you won't contribute to the wedding gifts. What is going on with you?" I took a deep breath and tried to explain calmly. "Mom, she didn't ask me to contribute to a wedding gift. She asked me to buy her a car and an apartment. That's not normal, and I'm not doing it." There was silence on the other end for a second, and then my mom sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "You know she's starting a new life. It would mean so much if you helped her get a good start." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I'm not bankrupting myself for a wedding, Mom. I have my own life to think about." That's when my dad cut in, his voice sharper than usual. "Lucas, if you can't support your sister on her big day, then maybe you should sit this one out. We don't need negativity ruining the celebration." That hit me harder than Mia's text had. I'd always been close with my dad, or at least I thought I had. To hear him take her side so quickly, without even trying to understand where I was coming from, made something snap inside me. "Fine," I said quietly. "If that's how you all feel, then I won't come." And I hung up. The days that followed were weirdly quiet. I didn't hear from anyone in the family for almost a week. No check-ins, no casual messages. I started to wonder if maybe I had overreacted, but then a friend of mine sent me a screenshot from Facebook. Mia had posted a long status about fake family members who abandon you when you need them most, and how she was so thankful for her real support system. Dozens of relatives had commented things like, "You don't need toxic people on your big day, and focus on your happiness, girl." I wanted to roll my eyes, but instead I just kept quiet. I focused on work, kept my head down, and tried not to think about it. Until yesterday, when I got another call, this time from my cousin, who was actually invited to the wedding. "Dude," he said, "you're not gonna believe what just happened at the bridal shower." He lowered his voice, like he didn't want anyone to overhear him. Mia went off on one of your aunts for not getting her the right handbag. She threw the gift bag back at her and said, "If you can't follow simple instructions, don't bother showing up." Half the room just got up and left. Your parents are trying to do damage control, but it's bad. Like, really bad. I just sat there listening, my pulse quickening. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Part of me wanted to look away, but part of me couldn't stop waiting to see what would happen next. For once, I wasn't the bad guy. I wasn't the one causing the drama. I was just sitting back and letting Mia show everyone exactly who she was. And then, right as I was processing what my cousin had told me, I got a new text from my mom. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." I stared at those 4 words for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore them entirely, let my parents stew in whatever mess Mia had just created. But curiosity got the better of me, so I wrote back. About what? The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, and then appeared again before Mom finally sent. "Can you come over tonight? We need to discuss the wedding." I almost laughed. Discuss the wedding? As if I was suddenly back on the guest list. As if everything that had been said to me, all the accusations and guilt tripping, had just magically vanished. I decided to go, not because I wanted to patch things up, but because I wanted to see what exactly they were planning to say now that Mia had publicly embarrassed herself. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I could feel the tension before I even walked through the door. My dad opened it, his face stiff, and just said, "Lucas," with a curt nod. No hug, no smile. Inside, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, and Mia was there too, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had personally ruined her life. "Thanks for coming," Mom started, her voice overly calm, the kind of calm she used when she was about to drop bad news. "We've been talking, and we really think this has gone too far. Mia's wedding is supposed to be a happy occasion, and right now everyone is tense and upset. It's time to put the past behind us and make things right." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my expression neutral. I'm not the one who made things tense. I was invited to the wedding, then uninvited because I didn't want to buy an apartment. That's not on me. Mia scoffed loudly. "Oh my gosh, are we really still talking about this? You're so dramatic. I never said you had to buy it. I just said it would be nice if you actually contributed for once. You've always been so selfish, Lucas. You make good money and you never help the family. Do you know how that makes me look when my own brother can't even support me?" I turned to her, my jaw tightening. "Mia, you didn't ask for help. You sent me a list of demands. That's not the same thing." Her eyes narrowed. "You always twist everything to make me look bad." At that point, Dad stood up, clearly trying to take control. "Look, arguing isn't going to solve anything. Here's what we've decided." He gestured to the stack of papers on the table. "These are some of the things Mia still needs for the wedding. We thought maybe you could at least take care of 1 or 2 of them as a gesture of goodwill." I walked over and looked at the list. It wasn't as outrageous as the first one, but it was still expensive. Catered rehearsal dinner, a weekend rental for the wedding photographer's travel, and a contribution toward the honeymoon suite. I felt a slow wave of disbelief. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice low. "Mia told me not to come if I didn't buy her an apartment, and you both supported her. I stayed quiet, didn't fight back, didn't show up at her bridal shower, and now you're calling me here to try to squeeze money out of me anyway." Mom shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about money, Lucas, it's about family. Everyone will notice if you're not there. People are already talking." "Good," I interrupted before I could stop myself. "Let them talk." That made Mia slam her hands on the table. "You are unbelievable. Do you even realize how humiliating this has been for me? Everyone thinks I'm some spoiled brat because you couldn't just keep this private. You've made me look like a fool." I felt something click in that moment, a strange calmness washing over me. "Mia," I said slowly, "I didn't make you look like anything. You did that all by yourself." The room went silent. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Dad looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, Mom spoke again, softer this time. "Lucas, please. Just think about what this will do to our family if you don't come. People will think we're divided." I took a deep breath and stood up straight. Maybe we are divided. And maybe that's not such a bad thing right now. Mia let out an incredulous laugh, half a scoff. "So you're really just going to skip my wedding? You're fine with me walking down the aisle knowing my own brother didn't care enough to show up?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "I care enough not to let you bully me into buying your happiness." Her face went red, and she opened her mouth to snap back, but Mom cut in quickly. That's enough for tonight. Everyone just needs to calm down. I turned to leave, and as I reached for the door, I heard Mia mutter under her breath. If he thinks he's going to get away with this, he's got another thing coming. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and for a brief moment, I considered saying something, warning her not to push me any further. But instead, I just walked out, letting the door click shut behind me. The air outside felt cooler than it should have. My chest felt heavy, but there was also this strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I wasn't the one trying to fix everything. I wasn't the one caving under the pressure to make peace. When I got home, I found that my phone had already started blowing up. Group texts from relatives, posts from extended family tagging me, some asking if it was true that I wasn't coming, others saying Mia had been in tears all evening. And then, just before midnight, I got another message, this time from my aunt, who has never been one to mince words. Lucas, it said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Tonight Mia lost it in front of everyone. People are starting to see what you've been dealing with all these years. I sat there staring at my phone, a slow, grim smile forming on my face. For once, I didn't feel like the villain of the story. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe letting things play out wasn't just the right choice. It was the only choice. But that was before this morning, when a certain unexpected invitation showed up in my mailbox. One that made me pause, sit down at the kitchen table, and wonder if my sister had just made the biggest mistake of her life. It wasn't a normal wedding invitation, not the pretty, embossed kind that couples usually send out. This one looked rushed, like it had been printed on regular cardstock and mailed last minute. My name was handwritten on the envelope, and inside was a single sheet that simply read, Lucas, you're invited back to the wedding. Please come. Mia. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the weeks of drama she had caused. Just a curt little note that sounded less like an olive branch and more like a command. I read it 3 times, trying to decide if this was some kind of joke. Then I noticed something odd. The RSVP section had been scratched out with pen, almost like they hadn't meant to send it, or had sent it out of desperation. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my cousin again. He was practically whispering, "You're not gonna believe this, but Mia is panicking. Half the wedding party is threatening to drop out. Your aunt won't speak to her. 2 of your uncles told her they're skipping entirely, and apparently one of her bridesmaids told her she's acting like a dictator. Your parents are begging people to still come." I leaned back in my chair, listening. There was a strange mix of satisfaction and heaviness in my chest. Satisfaction because Mia's tantrums were finally catching up to her. Heaviness because I could hear the stress in my cousin's voice. He genuinely didn't want the wedding to fall apart. "So now she wants me there to make it look like everything's fine," I said quietly. "Exactly," he replied. "I think she's terrified of losing face. She's telling people you misunderstood her, that it was just a joke, that she never meant to kick you out. But nobody's buying it. She's unraveling, man." That night, I got a text from my dad. This time, it was almost pleading. "Lucas, your sister is having a hard time. Please don't make things worse. Just come to the wedding. It would mean the world to your mother and me." I sat with that for a long time, my phone on the coffee table as I paced around the room. It wasn't lost on me how quickly the tables had turned. 2 weeks ago, I was the one being painted as the villain, the one being told to stay away. Now they were asking me to come back, not because they suddenly respected me, but because Mia's behavior had finally cost her something. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every moment in my head. The list she sent me, the ultimatum, the smug tone in her voice when she told me not to come, and then the way she exploded at the bridal shower. It felt like all those years of being brushed aside, told to just be the bigger person, were building up inside me. For once, I had the leverage. For once, she needed me more than I needed her. The next day, Mom called. This time her tone was softer, almost apologetic. "Lucas, honey, I know this has been hard. Your sister isn't perfect. She can be demanding, but she's under a lot of stress right now. Can't we all just move on? The wedding is supposed to be about love and family. Don't you want to be part of that?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I do want to be part of the family. But being part of the family shouldn't mean letting Mia walk all over me. Do you realize what she asked me for? A car, an apartment, designer bags. And when I said no, She tried to shame me into giving in. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Maybe she went too far, she admitted reluctantly. But she's your sister. If you don't come, she'll never forgive you. And I don't think I could handle seeing you two estranged forever. There it was, the emotional card I knew would come eventually. I closed my eyes, thinking, if I went, I'd be signaling that Mia could treat me however she wanted and still get what she wanted in the end. If I didn't go, I'd be blamed for ruining her big day, no matter how unreasonable she had been. That evening, I took a long walk around my neighborhood, trying to clear my head. I passed by a small wedding venue that was setting up for an event, and I stopped for a minute, watching strangers hang string lights and arrange flowers. I imagined Mia walking down the aisle, smug and satisfied that she had gotten her way. The thought made my stomach twist. When I got home, I found yet another message waiting for me, this time from Mia herself. It was longer than anything she'd sent before. Lucas, I know we've been fighting, but I really want you there. It won't feel right without you. I'll even let you bring whoever you want. Just please come. I promise it will be a day we can all look back on happily. For the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her words. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about reconciliation, it was about optics. She didn't want a happy day with her brother there. She wanted a perfect photo album. As I set the phone down, an idea began forming in the back of my mind. One that made me sit very still because it was equal parts satisfying and dangerous. And when my cousin called me later that night with one more piece of information, a very specific detail about Mia's seating chart, that idea suddenly became much clearer. When my cousin told me about the seating chart, I actually sat down and grabbed a pen. He said Mia had rearranged the entire front section so that the family would look picture perfect during the ceremony. My parents would sit in the front row, of course, right next to the groom's parents. Then, a few spots down, there was now a very conspicuous Lucas Plus guest place card, dead center, where everyone would see me the moment I walked in. It wasn't just about me being there anymore. This was about control. Mia wanted to stage a performance, a flawless wedding where she could show the world that everything was perfect, that she had the love and support of everyone, even the brother she had humiliated weeks earlier. And that was when I decided that if I went, I wouldn't just sit quietly and play along. I would go on my terms, not hers. The next day, I called my cousin back. Tell them I'll come, I said simply. But I'm not buying anything from that list, and I'm not changing my mind at the last minute. If they want me there, they get me as I am, not as Mia wants me to be. He laughed softly. Oh, this is going to be interesting. In the days leading up to the wedding, my phone blew up with messages from relatives thanking me for making peace, telling me how glad they were I'd be there. Mia even sent one more message, a single thumbs-up emoji, as if that was supposed to close the chapter. The morning of the wedding, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit I knew looked good on me, but wasn't flashy. I wasn't there to cause a scene, not yet. But I did bring a guest, not a date, but my best friend Eric, the one who had been my roommate in college and knew every story about my family drama. He had been there for me through my lowest points, including the night I paid off my last student loan while Mia was on a shopping trip in Paris. You sure about this? He asked as we pulled into the venue parking lot. Very sure, I said, though my heart was thudding in my chest. The venue was a beautiful vineyard, all white chairs and soft music and fairy lights strung between oak trees. As soon as we arrived, the air shifted. I could feel eyes on me as we walked toward the seating area. My mom spotted me first and stood up quickly, her face a mix of relief and nerves. Lucas, you made it, she said, giving me a quick hug. I'm so glad you came. My dad nodded at me stiffly, but I caught a flicker of pride in his expression, like he was glad I hadn't completely abandoned the family. Then Mia appeared. She looked stunning, of course, her makeup perfect, her hair done up in an elaborate style, but her smile when she saw me was too wide, too rehearsed. Lucas, she said in that airy, fake sweet tone. I'm so glad you could make it. I nodded politely. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Her eyes darted to Eric, clearly surprised. And you brought a friend? Yeah, I said evenly. I figured since I was being put on display, I might as well have someone in my corner. She blinked, but didn't respond, just turned on her heel and walked away to greet someone else. The ceremony started, and everything was as picture perfect as Mia had planned. The music swelled, the groom beamed, And when Mia walked down the aisle, there were actual gasps. For a brief moment, I almost softened, almost. But then I remembered the texts, the calls, the way she had told me not to come if I wouldn't buy her happiness. The real moment came after the vows, during the reception. People were laughing and clinking glasses, waiters weaving between tables with trays of champagne. I waited until after the first dance, when everyone's attention was on the couple, and then I stood up during the toast portion. "Hi, everyone," I said, raising my glass. "I'm Lucas, the brother who, until about a week ago, wasn't supposed to be here." There was an awkward ripple of laughter. I saw Mia's smile freeze for a split second. "I just wanted to say," I continued, "that weddings are supposed to be about love and new beginnings. They're also about family, the real kind of family, the kind that sticks together when things get hard, not just when it's convenient or when there's money involved." And I think today is a good day to remind ourselves that respect goes both ways. You could have heard a pin drop. Some people nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Mia's face was pale now, her hand gripping the back of her chair. "So," I went on, my voice calm but steady, "I didn't buy an apartment or a car or any of the other things I was asked to buy. What I did bring today was something better, myself, on my own terms. Because I may not be the perfect brother, but I refuse to be the doormat brother." I raised my glass again, finished my toast, and sat down. There was a beat of silence, and then several people, including my aunt, 2 uncles, and even the groom's father, actually clapped. Mia's face was crimson now. She stood up abruptly, muttered something about needing to check on the cake, and stalked off toward the kitchen. The rest of the reception felt lighter. People kept coming up to me, quietly thanking me for saying what they had been thinking for weeks. Even my dad eventually came over, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You spoke well, son." But the real fallout came later that night. My cousin texted me a photo from the bridal suite. Mia sitting on the floor in her wedding dress, mascara running down her face, my mom sitting next to her looking exhausted. Apparently, Mia had accused half the family of taking sides and threatened to cut people out of her life entirely. My cousin just wrote, "She finally sees it. Everyone's done catering to her tantrums." As Eric and I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time, I hadn't caved, hadn't apologized just to keep the peace. I had stood up for myself in front of everyone, and instead of making me the villain, it had forced Mia to confront her own behavior. The next morning, I woke up to a single text from my mom. "Lucas, I know last night was hard, but you did the right thing. Maybe this will be the wake-up call she needs." I stared at that message for a long time, then set the phone down and smiled. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd finally broken the cycle. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. Mia would have to decide whether she wanted to grow up or stay exactly where she was. Either way, I wasn't going back to being the quiet, compliant brother ever again. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. My name's Mark, I'm 34 years old, and last week was supposed to be one of the proudest nights of my life. Instead, it turned into the kind of memory that sticks to your chest like a stone you can't swallow. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be running a company worth over $100 million, I would have laughed. Back then, I was sleeping in a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint on the walls, living off gas station sandwiches while trying to convince investors that my idea wasn't a waste of their time. I built everything from the ground up. No handouts, no shortcuts. Every sleepless night, every failed pitch, every line of code, every firing and rehiring. I carried it myself. That night, the company had officially crossed the $100 million valuation mark. A milestone, something worth celebrating. I booked a ballroom, spared no expense, and sent invitations to every family member who had ever claimed they supported me in this journey. That evening, as the chandeliers above cast warm light over the polished marble floors, I sat at my table in a tailored suit that suddenly felt too tight. My employees were there, some investors too, but the table meant for my family remained eerily empty. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe traffic, maybe they were running late, maybe someone got the time wrong. But as the minutes stretched into hours, I knew. They weren't coming. My mother had texted me earlier in the day, a short message with a smiley face. "So proud of you, sweetheart." And my father, ever the stoic presence, had said, "We'll see." My younger brother James had said nothing, but he rarely did unless it was about himself. By 9 o'clock, the truth spilled in through the whispers of a cousin who showed up late. "They're at James's place," she said, hesitating, as if she hadn't meant to say it aloud. "Housewarming party. Everyone's there." My stomach twisted. James had just bought a house with money that didn't come from his own pocket, money my parents had loaned him. He hadn't earned it. He'd never worked a day past 5 o'clock without quitting. Yet somehow, his housewarming had taken priority over celebrating what I had poured my soul into for over a decade. I excused myself, walked to the bar, and poured a drink with hands that shook more than I wanted to admit. Glass in hand, I stared at the empty seats meant for my family, the place cards I had carefully written with their names. I had imagined laughing with them, maybe even a rare word of pride from my father. Instead, I was standing alone in a ballroom filled with people who respected me professionally but didn't know me personally. That was when my phone buzzed. Dad's name lit up the screen. For a brief second, I felt hope. It's ridiculous, I know. I thought maybe he was calling to explain, to apologize, to say they'd be arriving late and wanted to see me. I answered quickly, trying to hide the crack in my voice. "Hey, Dad." His voice came through, firm and measured, the way it always had when he wanted to remind me who held the authority. "Mark," he said, "I hope you're enjoying your little party. Remember this, whatever you build, it still belongs to the family. Don't forget that." I froze. My mind couldn't wrap itself around the audacity of those words. Here I was, standing in a room I had paid for with money I earned, celebrating a company I built with nothing but grit and years of sacrifice. And instead of congratulations, instead of pride, I got a reminder that in his eyes, I was just a tool. My achievements weren't mine, they belonged to the family. To James. To everyone but me. As I hung up the phone, I looked out across the ballroom, the music dulling into background noise, my reflection swimming in the glass of my drink. I realized this wasn't just about them not showing up. This was about years of being told I wasn't enough, years of being overshadowed by a younger brother who had been handed everything while I clawed for scraps. That call wasn't the first hint of disrespect. It was the confirmation of something I had ignored for far too long. And that was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Something cold, steady, and unshakable. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't going to be just another night where I swallowed the disappointment and moved on. This time, I was going to remember. And this time, I was going to make sure they remembered too. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my chest that no amount of coffee could wash away. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone on the counter like it was some kind of weapon. It felt absurd, but that short call from my dad the night before had left me rattled in a way nothing else had. "Whatever you build belongs to the family." The words wouldn't leave my head. They just kept repeating, like someone had etched them into the walls of my brain. I didn't text anyone, didn't call. I just went about my morning routine, scrolling through emails, sipping bitter coffee that tasted like regret. Then I made the mistake of opening social media. There they were. Dozens of photos from James's housewarming. My parents, grinning ear to ear. My cousins, raising glasses. Aunts and uncles clapping, all crowded around a table where James stood proudly like a king in his castle. My castle, I thought bitterly, because without my parents' money, without their constant bailing him out, James wouldn't have even been able to afford a garage, let alone a whole house. And then I saw the kicker. A video posted by my uncle. James giving a speech. "This house isn't just mine," James said, holding a glass of wine and smiling in that smug way of his. "It belongs to the family. Everything I have, I owe to them. This home is for all of us." The room erupted in applause. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. My dad stood tall, proud, patting James on the back like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. I nearly dropped my phone. He had used the exact same words my father had thrown at me the night before. "Belongs to the family." The truth hit me then. My father hadn't just called me out of nowhere with that line. He'd said it at the party, in front of everyone. It was the mantra of the evening. James was the golden child, and the rest of the family had circled around him like planets around a sun. I was just a distant star, burning on my own. The bitterness wasn't new. It was a feeling I'd learned to live with. But that morning it took root in a different way, sinking deeper, clawing at me. I replayed all the small moments of favoritism that had stacked up over the years like bricks in a wall. James crashing the family car at 18, Dad bought him a new one. James failing his first 2 semesters of college. Mom convinced a professor she knew to help him out with a fresh start. James losing job after job. He's still finding himself. They said, while I worked part-time at 3 places just to keep food on my plate. One memory hit me particularly hard. Years ago, when I told my parents I wanted to start my own business, I remember the silence. My dad stared at me across the dinner table, jaw clenched. "You don't have the discipline for that," he'd said flatly. "Stick with something stable. Leave the big dreams to people who can afford to fail." Mom had been quieter, but the look on her face was almost worse, a mix of pity and dismissal. Meanwhile, when James dropped out of college with no plan, Dad clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, son, you'll find your path. We're here for you." That pattern hadn't stopped. It had just evolved. Every loan, every bailout, every pat on the back for James was another cut to me. And now, even with my company valued at 9 figures, even with my name in articles and magazines, it wasn't enough. They still couldn't see me. They didn't want to. A few days later, I went to visit my parents. Part of me hoped I was overthinking. Maybe they didn't realize how much it had hurt to abandon my celebration. Maybe there was some explanation. But deep down, I knew. Still, I walked into their living room with a practiced smile. Mom was on the couch knitting, Dad in his chair with the evening paper. James, of course, was sprawled out, scrolling on his phone like he owned the place. "You weren't at the celebration," I said, sitting down. My voice was steadier than I felt. Mom didn't even look up from her knitting. "Oh, honey, we wanted to be there, but James had the housewarming, and you know how important that was." "Important?" I asked, almost laughing. "You think my company hitting $100 million wasn't important?" Dad lowered his paper slowly, peering at me over the top. "You're still young, Mark. There will be other milestones. But family comes first. James needed us. He needed support." I stared at him, my jaw tightening. "Support? He's 32 years old and hasn't held down a job for more than 6 months. I built something real. I've worked myself to the bone, and when I finally had a moment to celebrate, you chose him." James smirked from the couch, finally chiming in. "Don't take it personally, bro. My housewarming was for everyone. Your little company thing, it's just business." He shrugged like it was obvious, like what I had done meant nothing compared to him putting a down payment on a house. Mom clucked her tongue and set her knitting down. "Now, Mark, don't start an argument. We're all proud of you. But James is at a stage where he needs encouragement. You've always been the strong one." That line, I had heard it my whole life. "You're the strong one," which translated to, you don't get help, you don't get attention, you don't get the things he gets. You survive on your own. I clenched my fists. "I don't need your money or your encouragement." I never did. "But you could have at least shown up." Dad sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "Mark, you need to remember something. Whatever you accomplish, whatever you build, it reflects on this family. You're not an island. Don't start thinking you owe us nothing." James laughed under his breath. "Yeah, man. Don't get too full of yourself. If it weren't for how Dad raised us, you wouldn't have made it this far." That was when I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, like a rope finally breaking after years of strain. I stood up, nodded slowly, and said, "You're right. I owe you all so much." My voice was calm, but I could hear the ice in it. Mom smiled faintly, relieved, probably thinking I'd backed down. But as I walked out of that house, I knew I was done playing their game. Done being the afterthought, the backup, the one they leaned on without ever acknowledging. The next week brought more fuel to the fire. At a family dinner hosted by my aunt, the favoritism played out like a stage play. James arrived late, wearing clothes Dad had clearly bought for him, and everyone acted like a celebrity had walked in. Conversations hushed, heads turned. Applause even broke out when he jokingly held up his house key. Meanwhile, I was asked a few polite questions about that business thing before they moved on to gossip about James's new furniture. Then came the moment that seared itself into me. My father raised a toast. "To James," he said, lifting his glass. "For building a home that belongs to us all. He carries the family legacy proudly." I waited for my name, for even a passing mention. It never came. I clinked my glass with the others, smiling faintly, but inside, I was shaking. It was clear now. No matter what I built, no matter how high I climbed, they'd always look past me. They'd always see James as the center of their world and me as a tool, a background character in a story that should have been mine. And I realized something else, sitting there with that glass in my hand. If they were so determined to treat my achievements as belonging to them, maybe it was time to show them just how much weight that idea carried. But I didn't say anything that night. Not yet. I just listened, nodded, and tucked the bitterness away. Because something inside me had shifted again. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was calculating. And if my family thought they could keep taking from me, dismissing me, and twisting everything I built into something that belonged to them, they were about to learn what it meant to underestimate me. I wish I could say I distanced myself after that dinner at my aunt's place. That I put up walls and focused on the company, ignored the whispers and the slights. But it doesn't work that way with family, does it? You can't just shut the door in your mind and lock it. There's always another gathering, another phone call, another chance for them to wedge themselves into your life. For me, that wedge came in the form of my father's request. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in my office overlooking the city skyline. My company had just closed another deal that pushed us closer to expanding internationally. I should have been over the moon. Instead, my phone rang, and the name flashing across the screen pulled me back into the undertow. "Dad." "Mark," he said, not even bothering with small talk. "We need to talk about something important. Can you come over this weekend?" Something in his tone told me it wasn't optional. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That Saturday, I pulled into their driveway, the same house I'd grown up in, where every corner still carried echoes of my childhood, most of them unpleasant. The siding was freshly painted, the yard trimmed. It looked like stability, but inside, it felt like a stage set. Mom greeted me with her usual warmth, kissing my cheek, fussing about how thin I looked, pressing a plate of cookies into my hand like I was 12 again. James was there too, of course, lounging on the sofa with a beer in his hand, wearing a smug grin like he'd been waiting for me. Dad wasted no time. He sat at the head of the dining table, gestured for me to sit across from him, and folded his hands. "Mark, your company is doing very well. We're proud of you." The word proud felt hollow, like an afterthought. "Thank you," I said, carefully waiting. He leaned forward. "But you need to remember what I told you. What you build belongs to the family." I felt my jaw tighten. "I remember." "Good," he said, nodding. "Because James is trying to get his own business started. Something with real estate. He's found a property, but he needs backing. We were thinking you could help him out. An investment." I stared at him. At first, I thought I'd misheard. "You want me to fund James?" Dad's expression didn't change. "It's not funding. It's family supporting family. You've had success because of the values we gave you. Now it's your turn to give back." James smirked, sipping his beer. "It's not like you'd miss it, bro. What's a couple million to you? Besides, you know Dad's right. Family comes first." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not a joyful laugh. One of disbelief, sharp and bitter. "You didn't come to my celebration. You didn't even bother to text me congratulations. And now you want me to hand over millions to bail James out of another pipe dream." Mom placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Honey, don't talk like that. Your brother has potential. He just needs a chance." I pulled my arm back. "He's had chance after chance, Mom. You've given him everything. And he's thrown it all away." Dad's voice hardened. "Watch your tone. You wouldn't be where you are without this family. The way we raised you, the sacrifices we made, you owe us." I felt my stomach turn. That word again. Oh, as if all my years of sacrifice, the nights I went hungry, the friendships I lost to work, the back-breaking grind, none of it was mine. It was theirs. James leaned forward, his grin widening. "Think of it this way. I'll take the property, develop it, and we'll be partners. You'll finally get to work with me. It'll be fun." I stared at him, then at my parents, realizing the depth of it. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. They wanted to tie me down, make my success part of James's failures, so no matter how high I climbed, he'd be right there with me, dragging me down, tethering me to their version of family. "I'm not giving him money," I said firmly. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face darkened. Mom's lips trembled, like I'd broken her heart. James scoffed, shaking his head. "You've changed," Dad said finally, his voice low but laced with venom. "Success has made you arrogant. Selfish. Selfish," I repeated, my voice rising. "You've handed James everything on a silver platter and called it love. I built my life with nothing. I did it alone. And now you want to punish me for not sharing it with someone who's never worked for anything." Mom wiped at her eyes. You're tearing this family apart. That line hit like a knife. Because for years, they'd painted me as the glue, the dependable one, the strong one. And now, the second I refused to bend, I was the villain. I stood, pushing the chair back. If this is what family means, then maybe I don't need it. I walked toward the door, but Dad's voice stopped me cold. If you turn your back on us now, don't think we won't remember. Everything you own, everything you've built, it can still be taken. Don't test me, Mark. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. The threat wasn't empty. My parents had connections. They knew people. And for the first time, I wondered just how far they'd go to remind me who they thought held the power. I left without another word, my chest burning. But the betrayal wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. A week later, I got a call from my CFO, her voice tight with unease. Mark, did you authorize a meeting with a group of buyers? Your father and brother showed up at the office claiming they were representing you. They said you wanted to explore selling the company. The world tilted beneath me. My throat went dry. What? They brought paperwork, she continued. Draft contracts. They said you asked them to start the process. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. I hadn't authorized anything. I hadn't even mentioned selling. And yet here they were, my father and brother, parading into my company, my blood and sweat, trying to stake a claim to what I had built, trying to sell it out from under me. The image of my empty family table at the ballroom burned in my mind. Their laughter at James's housewarming. My father's voice telling me everything I had belonged to them. And now, this, walking into my company like they owned it, trying to strip it away piece by piece. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was betrayal. A deliberate, calculated attempt to take what was mine and fold it back into their orbit. And in that moment, something in me hardened for good. Because if they wanted to play this game, I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. I was going to remind them exactly who they had underestimated. The days that followed that phone call felt like I was moving through molasses. Every step forward pulled me deeper into the heaviness. I tried to keep my head down, to stay focused on work, but the betrayal clung to me. I couldn't walk into my office without imagining my father and James strutting through the same glass doors, pretending they had authority in a place they had never lifted a finger to build. My CFO, a sharp woman named Elena, gave me updates in clipped tones. We managed to shut down the conversations they started, she told me, sliding a folder across my desk. But Mark, they came prepared. They had documents with your name, fake authorizations. Someone helped them. That cut deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just my family meddling. They had dragged someone else into this, someone with enough legal know-how to make it convincing. For a moment, I felt the same old weakness, like I was the kid again, outnumbered at the dinner table, my voice drowned out by theirs. That weekend, I found myself driving aimlessly late at night, headlights painting empty roads. My thoughts circled the same questions. How much more could they take from me? Why wasn't it enough to simply let me exist outside their shadow? And the one that twisted hardest, why did I still crave their approval, even after all of this? The loneliness seeped into everything. I'd walk into a meeting and plaster on my professional smile, but at home, silence swallowed me whole. No family texts, no apologies, no recognition, just emptiness. It was like I had been erased, replaced by their version of events. I discovered that soon enough. At a cousin's barbecue, I showed up out of politeness, thinking maybe someone would finally ask me about the storm swirling around me. Instead, I overheard whispers. My aunt leaned into another relative, saying, James told us Mark's company is in trouble. That's why his father is stepping in to help sell it. Poor boy, he's in over his head. I froze mid-step, a beer bottle sweating in my hand. That was the narrative now. Not that they'd tried to hijack my company. Not that they'd attempted to undermine me. But that I was failing, and they were swooping in to rescue me. I didn't confront them at the barbecue. I smiled, nodded, and went through the motions, but inside, I was unraveling. The lies hurt more than the betrayal itself. They weren't just trying to take what I'd built. They were rewriting my story. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the couch in the dark, the city lights flickering through the window. I thought about everything I'd sacrificed, friends I'd lost touch with, birthdays I'd missed, the years I'd lived on instant noodles while coding through the night. All of it had been worth it when I believed I was building something undeniable. But now, even at the top, I was invisible to the people who were supposed to know me best. For the first time in years, I felt like giving up. Not on the company. Never that. but on the idea that family could ever mean what I wanted it to mean. Maybe I had been fooling myself all along, thinking they'd eventually come around, that one day I'd walk into a room and they'd see me, really see me. That fantasy was dead. But sometimes, when something dies, it leaves space for something else to take root. The turning point came quietly. One morning, I walked into the office early, before most of the team arrived. Elena was already there, her desk lamp casting a small circle of light. She looked up as I entered, studying me with that sharp gaze of hers. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I admitted. I sat across from her, rubbing my temples. "They're not going to stop. My father, my brother, they'll keep pushing until I either give in or break." Elena leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then you don't give them the chance. Mark, you've spent your whole life reacting to them. Maybe it's time you start planning." That word stuck with me. Planning. It was the first time I allowed myself to consider that I didn't have to just endure their games. That maybe I could turn their own habits, the entitlement, the arrogance, the blindness, against them. Still, the weight didn't lift overnight. Rock bottom isn't a single moment. It's a season. I dragged myself through weeks of strained board meetings, awkward family functions, and restless nights. My mother would still call occasionally, her voice sugary but lined with guilt. "Mark, why are you being so difficult? You know your brother needs help. You're strong. You can handle it. Don't let pride get in the way of family." Every time she said, "You're strong," I bit back the urge to shout. Because in her mind, strength meant being their safety net. It meant carrying burdens without acknowledgement, while James danced freely above the cracks. My father was less subtle. At a family dinner, he pulled me aside, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "You think you can walk away from us, but you can't. Blood is blood. Whatever you have, whatever you think you've earned, it's ours too. You can't separate yourself." I nodded, said nothing, but inside, I felt something coiling tighter. Even James began parading around like he had my blessing. He'd drop casual lines at gatherings. "When Mark and I finish this project, it's going to be big." He never mentioned the truth, that I had said no. The family ate it up. They saw him as the visionary now, the one carrying forward the legacy. And me? In their eyes, I was the ungrateful son, too stubborn to admit I needed them. The isolation cut deep. I started skipping family events, making excuses. But the calls, the messages, the rumors, they still found me. And each one chipped away at the person I thought I was. There was a night when it nearly broke me. I was in my office alone, long after everyone else had left. Papers were scattered across the desk, contracts I needed to sign, emails I hadn't answered. My phone buzzed. It was another message from James. "Don't fight it. Bro, Dad says it's already happening. Better to be on the winning side." Something inside me crumbled. I sat there, staring at the message until the screen went dark. And for the first time in years, I cried. Quietly, shoulders shaking, forehead pressed against my hands. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief, for the family I had wanted, for the recognition I would never get, for the years of bending myself into knots for people who would never be satisfied. But grief has a strange way of clarifying things. As the tears dried, I realized I had a choice. I could let them rewrite my story, or I could take control of the pen. The next morning, I walked into the office, head high. Elena glanced at me and did a double take. "Something changed," she said. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "I'm done playing their game." I didn't tell her everything then. I didn't tell anyone. But in the back of my mind, threads were already weaving together. Their arrogance, their greed, their certainty that I would always be the strong one who carried them. It was a weakness, one I could use. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was sharper than that. It was resolve. And as I stared out the window at the city I had built my life in, I knew rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the foundation for something else. Something they wouldn't see coming. The months after that breakdown in my office were the strangest I'd ever lived through. On the surface, life looked like a climb back to normal. But beneath it, something sharper was taking shape, a version of me that didn't crave approval anymore. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to win their love. I was thinking about how to win, period. It started small. I stopped going to family events altogether. No explanations, no apologies, just silence. At first, the calls and texts from my mom came daily. "Honey, everyone's asking about you. Don't distance yourself, it's not healthy. Or, you know your brother misses you. He wants you to be part of this new chapter. I ignored them all, and when I didn't respond, her tone shifted. You're acting cold. This isn't like you. Then finally, if you keep this up, don't expect us to wait forever. I read those messages with the same calm I now carried into every boardroom. They wanted me desperate for their attention. But the truth? The silence was freeing. Meanwhile, the company began to soar. Elena and I doubled down on expansion, pouring resources into international growth. Within months, we had an office in London, another in Berlin, and serious talks opening in Singapore. Articles ran with headlines like, "Self-made visionary takes tech overseas." I tried to brush it off, but when I saw my name in those headlines, a different kind of pride took hold. Not the brittle pride of hoping someone else would see me, but the solid pride of knowing I'd done this myself. The funny thing about success is how it attracts attention you didn't ask for. Investors who had once dismissed me now wanted meetings. Industry veterans suddenly wanted to sit across from me at conferences, nodding and taking notes. My inbox filled with speaking requests, panel invitations, even award nominations. The recognition I'd begged for from my family was flowing in from strangers, and though it didn't erase the pain, it steadied me. It was in those moments I realized just how much I'd been starved for acknowledgement. And if my family wasn't capable of giving it, then fine. I didn't need them. Still, their shadows lingered. Rumors kept reaching me through relatives. James bragging about his upcoming partnership with Mark, Dad telling distant cousins that he was guiding me through expansion, as if my company was a family project. It should have infuriated me, and it did, but more than that, it crystallized a new truth. They didn't even see me as separate. In their minds, my victories were theirs by default. That arrogance was exactly what I could use. One late evening, Elena and I were poring over contracts in the conference room, the city glowing beyond the glass walls. She looked up from her notes. You've been different lately. More focused. But not just on the company. You're planning something, aren't you? I met her gaze. Elena had been with me since the early days, when the office was just a shared desk and a busted coffee machine. She had seen every high and low, every panic, every gamble. If anyone deserved the truth, it was her. Not yet, I said carefully. But soon. They think they own me. That they can take what I've built and bend it into their story. I'm going to show them they can't. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press. She just nodded, like she understood more than I'd said. That conversation replayed in my mind over the next weeks as I began laying groundwork. Not for confrontation, but for control. I started by separating my assets. Quietly, discreetly, I moved holdings into trusts, LLCs, and entities under names only my legal team and I knew. I locked down intellectual property, tightened board voting rights, and rewrote contracts so no one, without my explicit authorization, could represent the company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was armor. Armor I knew I'd need. At the same time, I started building influence. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. I accepted those speaking gigs, those panels, those interviews. I didn't care about the applause. I cared about the credibility. The more visible I became as an individual force, the harder it would be for anyone to rewrite my story as the family's project. Every article that named me as the founder, every stage where I spoke as the face of the company, it was another brick in the wall between me and their narrative. And something else happened, too. For the first time in years, people began to look at me not just as a businessman, but as a leader. Young entrepreneurs asked me for advice. Employees pulled me aside after meetings, thanking me for opportunities they never thought they'd have. Those moments filled something in me my family never had. Recognition, yes, but also respect. Real respect. Meanwhile, the family tried to pull me back in. James sent a barrage of texts. We need to meet. Dad says it's time. You can't ignore us forever. I left them unread. My mother left voicemails where her voice trembled between pleading and scolding. You don't mean this. You've always been the strong one. Don't punish us because you're upset. But the silence became my weapon. Every day, I didn't respond. Every event I skipped, every attempt I ignored. It all chipped away at their illusion of control. And then, an opportunity fell into my lap. At a major industry gala, where I'd been invited to speak, I spotted them. My parents, sitting at a table across the room, flanked by relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. And next to them, James, smug as ever, dressed in a suit he hadn't earned, sipping champagne like he belonged. I hadn't invited them. The organizers had, no doubt thinking they were part of my story. And of course, my family had come. When I took the stage, the applause echoed. Cameras flashed. I looked out at the crowd and saw their faces. My father, tight-lipped but watching. My mother, smiling like she wanted to take credit. James, clapping lazily, already planning how he'd twist this into his narrative. But this time, it didn't sting. It fueled me. I spoke with calm confidence, laying out the vision for the company's future. International growth, social impact projects, innovations we were about to roll out. I talked about sacrifice, resilience, and what it meant to build something from nothing. And every word, every sentence, was a reminder, to them, and to me, that I had done this. Alone. The crowd rose to their feet when I finished. Cameras swiveled, reporters leaned forward. And in that thunder of applause, I looked directly at my family's table. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. James looked annoyed, almost threatened. My mother smiled wider, like she could claim it as hers. But I knew the truth. For the first time, I felt it in my bones. I didn't need them. The rise wasn't just financial. It was personal. Because the higher I climbed, the clearer it became. The gap between who I was and who they thought I was had become unbridgeable. And soon, I would make sure they saw it with their own eyes. That night, as I left the gala, my phone buzzed. A message from James. Nice speech. But don't forget, family comes first. Dad's got plans for us. Call me. I stared at it for a long time, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Because what James didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their plans were about to collide headfirst with mine. And mine were already in motion. It's strange how power shifts. One day you're the one sitting in silence while people talk over you, and the next you're watching them dig their own graves with every smug word they speak. By the time James sent that message after my gala speech, the dynamic had already begun to turn. They didn't know it yet, but the balance was tilting, and this time I wasn't going to let it slide back. The first real break came unexpectedly, in the form of a former friend of James's. His name was Aaron, a smooth-talking guy who'd known my brother since college. I ran into him at a private networking event in New York. He spotted me across the room and raised his glass like we were old friends, though we'd barely spoken before. "Mark," he said, sliding into conversation with ease. "Congratulations on the London office. That's huge." We talked for a while, the usual small talk, until the conversation drifted toward family. He gave a little laugh, lowering his voice. "You know, James owes me money." I blinked. "What do you mean?" Aaron shrugged, swirling the drink in his glass. "We tried to start something together a couple years back. Real estate development. James swore he had your backing. Said you were just waiting for the right time. I bought into it, put up capital, and when things collapsed, he blamed you. Told everyone you'd pulled out at the last minute and left him hanging." The words stung, but they weren't surprising. James had been using my name as currency for years. And people believed him? I asked. Aaron's smirk said it all. Why wouldn't they? You were always the successful one. If he said you abandoned him, well, it explained why he failed. He's been dining out on that story for a while, telling people you owe him, that you promised to bring him in eventually. I figured you should know. I thanked him, and on the flight home that night, my mind spun. It was confirmation of what I had already suspected. James had been building his little empire of lies with my name at the foundation. That wasn't just arrogance, it was leverage. Because if he was spreading my name around without my consent, making deals and debts in my shadow, then all I had to do was shine a light on it. But I didn't move right away. Revenge isn't about swinging wildly. It's about waiting, collecting, making sure when you do strike, there's no way back for them. So I started collecting. Quietly. I hired a discreet legal team, one I trusted outside the company's usual circle, and had them dig. Not just into James, but into every financial string my father had tied to him. Property records, business filings, loan agreements. I wanted to see where the cracks were. The results were enlightening. James wasn't just careless, he was reckless. He had loans stacked on loans, debts hidden under shell companies, investments that were bleeding money faster than they came in. And threaded through it all was my father. Co-signing, covering, funneling money through back channels to keep James afloat. On paper, it looked like support. In reality, it was a house of cards built on denial. And then came the detail that made my pulse quicken. Several of the loans had been made in my name. Not literally, not with my signature, but with forged documents so clean it was almost frightening. My father's connections had pulled strings to make it look legitimate, banking on the assumption that if it ever came to light, I'd fold rather than expose them. When I read the reports, my chest felt tight. It was worse than I'd imagined. They hadn't just tried to sell my company once. They had been building a financial noose around me for years. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. Because here was the truth. They thought they owned me. But in their arrogance, they had left a trail I could use. That was the first piece of the setup. Information. The second piece was power. Around that time, I was invited to join an international business council, an elite circle of CEOs and investors who influenced more than I ever realized. At first, I hesitated. It felt like another obligation, another stage where I'd have to prove myself. But Elena pushed me. This isn't just prestige, she said. This is protection. Once you're in, no one can touch you without touching them. She was right. Within months, I was seated at tables with people who could make or break fortunes with a single phone call. Men and women who had built empires, who nodded when I spoke, who asked for my perspective. It was surreal, but it was also grounding. I wasn't the overlooked son at the dinner table anymore. I was the person others leaned toward, eager to hear from. And slowly, I realized what that meant. If my family wanted to paint me as unstable, selfish, or failing, their voices wouldn't carry here. Not against the credibility I was building, not against the network I was weaving. The third piece came by accident. One evening, while reviewing expansion plans, I discovered that the Berlin office lease was owned by a holding company that, strangely, traced back to an old associate of my father's. At first, I panicked. Was he infiltrating my operations again? But as I dug deeper, I found the opposite. The associate was disgruntled, fed up with years of unpaid favors and broken promises from my father. We met quietly in a cafe during a trip to Europe. He was an older man, sharp-eyed despite his age. He leaned across the table and said, "Your father thinks loyalty lasts forever. It doesn't. I don't owe him anything anymore. But you're different. You built something real." He offered me records, emails, agreements, proof of how my father had manipulated not just me, but countless others. I accepted, thanking him, and as I boarded the plane back to New York, I knew the setup was complete. I had information, I had power, and now I had evidence. Meanwhile, my family was blind to it all. They continued parading around, telling relatives about our company, spinning stories about how I was about to fold James into a leadership role. My mother still left voicemails about how proud she was that we're all in this together. They had no idea that every lie, every forged paper, every false claim was already in my hands. And as the months passed, I began to see the shape of the revenge forming. It wouldn't be loud at first. It wouldn't be messy. It would be precise. Because when you've been underestimated your whole life, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting. It's letting them walk straight into a trap they never saw coming. I remember one evening in particular. I was standing in my office, the city sprawling out in lights below me. Elena stepped in, dropping a stack of reports on my desk. "You've been quiet lately," she said, studying me. "Too quiet. Whatever you're planning, it's close, isn't it?" I turned to the window, watching the lights flicker like a constellation. "They think they own me," I said softly. "They think everything I've built is theirs. But soon, they're going to learn the truth." She raised an eyebrow. "And what truth is that?" I glanced back at her, a small smile pulling at my lips. That I never belonged to them. Not even once. And as I said it, for the first time, I believed it. The setup was nearly complete. All that remained was to choose the moment they would never forget. The thing about revenge is that it never looks the way you imagine in the movies. There's no triumphant music, no slow-motion smirk. Most of it is boring. Emails, filings, phone calls, small signatures that add up. But when the boring things line up, the moment they all snap together can feel, for a breath, like triumph. That's what I'd been building toward, quietly, coldly, for months. And when it finally happened, it hit like a precisely thrown stone, clean, unavoidable, and splashing everyone who had thought they were untouchable. I didn't go for fireworks. I went for structural collapse. I took the evidence Elena and the legal team had assembled and turned it from whispers into a legal and public narrative no one could spin away. We had the forged loan documents, the shell companies, the paper trail tying my father to back-channel transfers. We had witness statements from people James had lied to, including Aaron, who confirmed that my brother had been promising my backing to hoodwink investors and creditors. We had the Berlin holding company emails showing one of Dad's associates trying to keep leverage over my operations. And we had, most damningly, a paper trail showing several loans and guarantees that had been attached, illegally, to my name. Elena and I mapped it out like chess players. We didn't file everything at once. That would have been noisy and given them chances to cover tracks. Instead, we executed measured moves that cut off options and exposed the rot. First, we fortified. I finalized the last of the asset transfers, making sure the company's operating agreements and voting rights could not be hijacked by someone waving forged papers. Then we started the quiet legal squeeze, cease and desist letters to anyone who used my name in fundraising for James, notifications to banks about potential fraud connected to my name, and a private demand to the handful of investors James had been courting, giving them a choice: walk away from anything he said I endorsed or risk being tied into a lawsuit. That part felt clinical. I wasn't enjoying it so much as administering justice. I slept less, lived on bad coffee, and saw Elena pacing halls while our lawyers coordinated with forensic accountants. But the point was not catharsis. The point was inevitability. Make enough doors close, and you force the guilty to step into the light, or else watch their scaffolding collapse without the support they'd counted on. The first public thread we pulled was simple and merciless. A carefully worded press release explaining that the company's founder, me, had been the victim of an attempted misrepresentation by outside parties claiming to represent the company's interests. It didn't name my family. It didn't need to. But it set a tone. Anyone dealing with my brother or my father in a business capacity should beware of fraudulent claims. We distributed it through channels I'd earned, the journalists who'd covered our growth, the industry newsletters where our name carried weight. The effect was immediate. Investors James had been flirting with reached out to me directly, confused and embarrassed, asking for clarification. I answered once, pointedly, and then let them fall silent as their wallets closed. While the press did its work, we moved the legal pieces. I filed a civil suit aimed squarely at the forged documents and the parties who had crafted them. I asked for immediate injunctive relief to block any transfers or sales done in my company's name without board approval. The judge granted a temporary restraining order within days. Once the court had put its stamp on the claim, the oxygen was gone. That's when the family's blind confidence became their undoing. They had operated under the assumption that intimidation and inside favors could keep everything together. When bank managers and lawyers started calling them back with "We received a notice," and "We need to review these signatures," the calm facade cracked. My father, who had always used connections and favors like a shield, suddenly had to explain real documents to people outside his circle. He was uncomfortable when the conversation wasn't about toasts and handshakes. James, who had run his mouth for years about the partnership he'd soon be leading, suddenly found those partners backing away. I did not make a spectacle of it at first. I let the court do what I needed it to do: freeze suspicious accounts, flag questionable property titles, and subpoena the records that would show the truth. But of course they panicked. My father called a flurry of relatives, trying to marshal support, to present a different picture. Mom's texts grew frantic, pleads for me to just talk, for us to fix this as a family. James sent ugly messages, blaming me, calling me cold and ungrateful, insisting this was a misunderstanding that I could repair with a big man move. He begged a few people, investors, old friends, to corroborate his lies. The problem was he was asking people I'd just publicly warned to be careful. The very people he leaned on were now the people who, when they checked the public filings, saw the judge's order and took a step back. Then came the meeting that changed everything. A week after the restraining order, I decided the family deserved full visibility. I didn't want to ambush them with news clippings. I wanted them to hear it and feel it directly. I scheduled a family meeting, worded neutrally, and sent it through my mother because, I reasoned, if they were going to be shocked, I wanted them to be responsible for their own silence up to this point. Dad, of course, accepted. He thought it would be another opportunity to cajole and charm. James saw it as a chance to posture. Mom thought she could smooth it over. We met in the same municipal building where I'd signed the incorporation papers 10 years earlier. Ironic and intentional. I asked for a small room, a table, the kind of neutral space that would make theatrics hard. I arrived with Elena and 2 lawyers. My father arrived with a retinue. James, Mom, an uncle, even that same associate who'd once tried to help my father hide things, proudly sitting like a consigliere. They brought bravado, we brought documents and a hardline calm. I laid the first file on the table. It was a clear, crisp printout of the forged guarantee bearing my name. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. James's face went red. Dad's jaw tightened, but he tried to smile. "Where did this come from?" he asked, voice steady. "You know where it came from," I said. I slid the next folder across. Emails from Aaron, messages from an investor who'd been pressured by my brother's claims, bank correspondence flagged for fraud. I watched them as the room's air changed. There was that distinct moment when the world you've been telling yourself about and the world that's actually true no longer overlap. "You're making accusations," Dad said, the rehearsed indignation he'd used in the past when cornered. "I'm presenting evidence," I corrected. "If you believe these are false, we'll let the courts decide. But I'm not going to be the person who let my name be used as collateral for your bad decisions." It was James who burst first. "You think you can stand there and humiliate us?" he spat, lunging forward. "All your fame, all your headlines, you think it makes you better than us?" His voice bounced off the cheap conference room table, angry and adolescent. "You used my name to borrow money," I said, calmly, with the kind of precision that felt surgical. "You summoned people under a false pretense. You signed my name without my knowledge, in some cases forging documents. Those are crimes, James. Civil and potentially criminal." He laughed, the sound brittle. "You don't have the proof." I pushed another folder forward. Bank replies. Records of transfers. The associate, Dad's old friend, who'd turned on him, provided a witness statement saying he'd been instructed to backdate contracts and make signatures look legitimate. Aaron gave a sworn statement. The paper was dense, undeniable. The room fell into a heavy quiet. Mom began to cry. Not the theatrical tears I remembered from holidays, but sharp, scared sobs that made me feel something old and complicated in my chest. Dad's lips went white. My uncle muttered that this was a shame, a family matter. "It's not just a family matter," Elena said, cool and direct. "You knowingly attached Mr. Harris's name to loans and deals. You forged documents, and you presented them to financial institutions. We've forwarded everything to the district attorney's office and the banks. They are now conducting their independent reviews." The gasp in the room felt loud enough to break the windows. That was the thing about involving institutions. Once you hand the paper to someone with teeth, the game changes. It's no longer about melodrama. It's about process, subpoenas, forensics, and arrests if the facts bear out. Dad stood abruptly. He tried to marshal an explanation, to frame it as a misunderstanding, a desperate attempt to help James that got out of hand. He reached for platitudes, about family, about duty, but the legal team cut him off with quiet phrases. "We asked you not to represent yourself. You have counsel. Please refrain from contact with our client." James, who'd been so sure he'd dance into a role as co-founder, looked suddenly very small. His bravado evaporated when the people he'd called partnerships with began to distance themselves in real time. His text messages lit up asking for help, messages I ignored. As we left that meeting, I felt none of the giddy relief I thought I might. It was cleaner than shouting, but colder, too. I'd forced things into a legal arena. I'd shown them the knife. I'd taken away the myth that kept their behavior tolerated. At the same time, I'd set forces in motion that were larger than any of us. What I hadn't expected was how quickly the social consequences would follow. Word travels fast in extended families. Within 24 hours, relatives began calling me, some with sympathy, some with suspicion. Reporters pinged Elena for comment. My mother's voicemail exploded with pleas and apologies that sounded rehearsed. My father made one last attempt to bend the narrative, publicly painting himself as a protector, not a manipulator. But the documents and the court order had already started to tell a different story. And then the first official letter arrived. Not to me, but to my father. It was brief, the kind of bureaucratic paper that can feel heavier than any sermon. A notification that an account had been frozen pending investigation. Then another letter for James, a demand for immediate accounting from one of his creditors. The dominoes were starting to fall. I would be lying if I said I slept that night. I lay awake, thinking about the quiet faces during the meeting, the look in my mother's eyes that was equal parts fear and betrayal, the way James had gone white when the bank letters were mentioned, the strain in my father's shoulders. I thought about how cruel it felt to watch them scramble and how necessary it had been. I thought about all the nights I'd swallowed the hurt and kept going, and how this felt like an accounting. There was one last whisper of a surprise waiting in the wings, something I had not yet made public, something Elena and I had kept close, a safeguard that would change the stakes again. I had not deployed it yet because timing mattered. Secrets only work if you control when they are unveiled. As the sun rose the next morning, my phone buzzed. Multiple headlines had already started to run. Social feeds were filling with versions of the story, some sympathetic to me, others angry and confused. My mother called, her voice trembling between panic and pleading, begging me to come home and talk. Dad sent a terse text, "We need to handle this together." I looked at the string of messages and finally typed back one sentence. "We will talk, but not now." And then my doorbell rang. I went to answer it, expecting a relative or perhaps an investigator. Instead, two men in suits stood on my stoop, badges glinting when they moved. They introduced themselves with the same polite gravity I'd seen in the courtroom. One handed me a card, the other a document. "Mr. Harris," he said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions." My stomach dropped in a way that made my knees go weak. The trapdoors I'd opened were swinging. The revenge I'd constructed was doing what it was meant to do, force truth into the daylight. But as the men led me to a chair in my living room and began to ask routine, careful questions about the documents, I realized how thin the line was between justice and chaos. I'd wanted them to look, to investigate, to pry open the shell of lies my family had built. I hadn't imagined how fast it would all move once the state took an interest. My heart pounded. Outside, through the window, I could see my parents' house, just a row of lights away, and I thought of the meeting table, the papers, my brother's face as he realized the ground was crumbling. I tried to steady myself, to remember everything Elena had told me about how to present facts, how to stay calm. But under that professionalism, there was a raw, spinning thing, relief braided with dread. Because once the law is involved, you don't control the consequences. You can only set the dominoes and watch where they fall. They asked me to step through the timeline, to recount conversations, to sign. I did. I answered honestly. I turned over more records. I felt like a surgeon watching an operation from the other side of glass. Necessary, clinical, and somehow brutal. When the men left, they said nothing dramatic. They promised to be in touch. They nodded curtly and walked down my stoop, leaving the night quiet and heavy. I closed the door and sank onto my couch, phone buzzing with family messages that made my chest ache. I had unleashed a force that would not be easily contained. I had exposed the rot that had poisoned a family for years. I had done what I'd set out to do, take the leverage they'd used over me and turn it into an engine that would, finally, reveal the truth. And yet, as adrenaline ebbed, a single clear thought surfaced, colder than satisfaction. Exposing them might win me the moral battle, but it also opened doors I couldn't predict. I had stirred official attention, financial audits, and legal consequences. I had invited prosecutors and creditors and reporters into a private life. I had removed the safety nets, not only for my father and brother, but for everyone who had been dragged into their decisions. There was one last thing I had to decide: how far I was willing to let the law go. How much ruin would I accept if it meant they never used my name as currency again? Because revenge, even smart revenge, is a ledger, and ledgers sometimes demand payments you don't want to make. As the sun cut through the blinds, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't a message from family or a headline clipping. It was a short, encrypted note from Elena, 2 words and a timestamp. "It's moving. 10 o'clock. I stood and walked to the window, watching the street below, watching the city that had become my life. My hand closed around the phone so tight my knuckles bleached white. I had set the stage, pulled the strings, and watched the first acts unfold. But as the next scene crept toward the morning, I realized one unavoidable truth. Once you let fate loose, you can't take the play back. The doorbell rang again. The doorbell ringing that morning wasn't just another formality. It was the sound of the dominoes crashing down. By the time the investigators left my apartment, I knew the tide had shifted in a way that no one in my family could spin or smother. What had begun as my quiet defense was now in motion under the weight of the law, and once the law decides to move, it does not stop for tears, excuses, or family pride. Within a week, the fallout became visible. My father, who had built his entire reputation on commanding respect in the community, was suddenly the subject of whispers. Bank accounts were frozen. His name appeared in local business journals, couched in phrases like "under investigation for financial irregularities." Men who had once clapped him on the back in country clubs avoided eye contact. One longtime friend of his, a man I remembered from my childhood as Uncle Phil, though he wasn't family, returned a check Dad had written for a fundraiser, telling him bluntly that he couldn't be associated with him anymore. The humiliation ate at him. I could see it. He tried to call me 3 times, each voicemail a different tone. The first was commanding. "Mark, this has gone too far. You need to call them and put a stop to it." The second was softer, more pleading. "Son, we don't need outsiders involved. We can fix this between us." The third was just silence for a few seconds before a sigh and a click. James fared worse. The investors he'd strung along for months turned on him immediately, demanding repayments he couldn't possibly make. One even threatened to sue, claiming James had lured him into deals under false pretenses. His so-called friends, the ones who had cheered at his housewarming, stopped answering his calls. I knew because he sent me a frantic, rambling email. "Mark, they're all turning on me. Dad says you can still fix this. Please just tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll cut you in. Just don't let them ruin me." I didn't reply. Mom was the only one who tried to hold the pieces together, but her efforts were tragic. She called me late at night, her voice raw from crying. "I never knew it was this bad. I thought your father was just helping. I didn't know about the loans, the papers. Please, Mark, you can't let him go to prison. He's your father." I listened in silence, the old part of me, the boy who had once wanted her approval, aching. But then I remembered the empty chairs at my table, the smug smile on James's face as they toasted him at the housewarming instead of me, the words my father had spoken over the phone. "Whatever you build still belongs to the family." And I realized something with bone-deep clarity. They had written this ending themselves. The official hammer dropped on a gray Tuesday morning. A quiet headline in the business section of the paper announced it. "Local businessman and son facing fraud charges after forged loan scheme." My father and James were named, their dealings laid bare. The article noted, carefully, that I had been the victim of the forgeries and had cooperated fully with the investigation. My company's name was cleared. Theirs was not. The community's response was swift. My father lost his seat on 2 boards he'd sat on for years. James's half-baked real estate project collapsed entirely when creditors pulled out. Even our extended family, who had always seemed to orbit around Dad's authority, split. Some called me privately, apologizing for believing lies about me. Others were angry, accusing me of destroying the family. But I didn't argue. For once, I let their opinions wash over me without needing to defend myself. The final blow came at a family gathering, one I hadn't planned to attend but did, out of some morbid curiosity. It was my cousin's birthday, a small barbecue in the backyard. I arrived late, quietly, and found the air heavy with tension. My father sat in a corner, shoulders hunched, his once commanding presence reduced to a tired old man staring at the grass. My mother hovered near him, fussing, but her eyes kept flicking nervously to the clusters of relatives whispering nearby. James, red-eyed and disheveled, tried to approach me when I walked in. "Mark," he said, his voice breaking, "you don't understand. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I just wanted to be like you." I looked at him for a long moment. All the years of resentment, favoritism, lies, and entitlement boiled down to this. A broken man who had tried to steal what he couldn't build. My heart should have softened, but it didn't. "You never wanted to be like me," I said evenly. "You wanted everything I had without doing any of the work. And now you've learned what that costs." His face crumpled, and he turned away. Later, as I was leaving, my father finally spoke. His voice was quiet, hoarse, nothing like the man who had once commanded every room. "Mark," he said, not looking at me, "was it worth it? Destroying your own family?" I stopped at the gate, hand resting on the latch. The whole yard had gone silent, every relative straining to hear. I turned back, meeting his eyes. "No," I said. "I didn't destroy this family. You did, when you decided my work, my life, my success belonged to you instead of me. All I did was show everyone what was already true." There was no shouting, no applause. Just silence, thick and final. I walked out of that yard with my head high, the weight of years finally lifting. For the first time, I felt completely free, not because I had won some dramatic battle, but because I had let go of the chains they had tried to wrap around me my entire life. As I drove away, the setting sun painted the sky in fire, and I realized something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. I hadn't just taken back what was mine. I had proven, once and for all, that I had never belonged to them. And they would remember that truth for the rest of their lives. When your own parents take you to court, you start questioning everything: your childhood, your worth, your sanity. I never imagined I'd end up in a courtroom, facing the people who raised me, fighting for the roof over my head. And I definitely didn't expect the turning point to come from my 7-year-old son. My name's Michael. I'm 36. I'm a teacher, a dad, and, for the past 12 years, the guy who's been holding the family house together while everyone else moved on. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Turns out, they were never really gone. They were just waiting. The house was nothing fancy, not by most people's standards. A 3-bedroom, brick-and-siding home in the suburbs. It had a creaky floor in the hallway, a busted screen door we never fixed, and a maple tree in the front yard that turned into a fireball every October. But it was home. It was where I brought my son home from the hospital, where I buried my dog in the backyard, where I sat on the porch with my wife on long, quiet evenings, before the divorce, before everything turned to dust. My parents, Ronald and Diane, moved to Florida back in 2011. They said they were tired of the snow and needed a fresh start. I was 24 at the time, freshly married, newly graduated, and trying to make ends meet with a substitute teaching gig. When they offered to let me stay in the house for as long as I needed, rent-free, I honestly thought it was a gift. They made it sound like a family legacy. "Keep it in good shape," my mom had said, brushing my hair back like I was still her little boy. "One day, it'll be yours anyway." They didn't give me a lease. No paperwork. Just a verbal promise and a hug on their way out the door. And I believed them. Fast forward to now. I've poured over a decade of my life into that place. Fixed the plumbing, replaced the roof with my own savings, repainted every room by hand. Even turned the basement into a little playroom for my son, Josh. I paid the taxes. I mowed the lawn. I kept it alive. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Adam, golden child, finance guy, always on some new self-help kick, was bouncing between high-rise condos in the city, living fast and burning through jobs. He was the type of guy who posted inspirational quotes with shirtless gym selfies and called them content. We'd never been close, even as kids. I was the quiet one, the sensitive one. He was the loud one, the talker, the performer. It all started last Christmas. We were doing our usual family thing, a week at my parents' place in Naples, Florida. They like everything to be big and dramatic. Matching pajamas, rented boats, catered dinners. Josh had just turned 7, and he was obsessed with sea turtles, so I took him on this little eco-tour thing, just the two of us. While we were gone, Adam apparently made some kind of pitch to our parents. I didn't know it at the time. All I knew was that when I got back, I walked into a very weird conversation. "It's not about deserving it, Adam," my mom was saying, clearly flustered. "But he's just living there," Adam snapped back. "He's not even paying rent. You said it yourself. He's been there long enough." They both stopped talking the second I walked into the room. My mom forced a smile. Adam just smirked like he'd caught me doing something wrong. I remember this tightness in my chest, like I'd missed something important and couldn't rewind to hear it. "Hey," I said slowly. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Mom replied too quickly. "Just talking about your old bedroom. That's all." I didn't believe her. Not for a second. But I let it go. Then things started happening fast. When we got home, there was a letter taped to the front door. From a law firm. It said that the owners of the property were reviewing occupancy and considering a transfer of ownership. I called my mom in a panic. She told me not to read into it, that they were just evaluating options for estate planning. But 2 weeks later, I was served. Served. My own parents were suing me to vacate the house I'd lived in and maintained for 12 years, so they could transfer the deed to a more responsible family member. They didn't even have the courage to say Adam's name in the paperwork. I was stunned. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, just staring at the documents like they were written in another language. Josh was playing with Legos on the carpet. He looked up at me with those big eyes and asked, "Are we moving?" I didn't know how to answer. I still don't. I tried calling my parents again, but they stopped picking up. My mom finally texted back days later saying, "It's best if we handle this through legal channels. This isn't personal." Not personal? I was fighting for the roof over my kid's head. And it wasn't personal? I thought maybe there was still some misunderstanding. So I drove to Adam's apartment. I was angry, yes, but I just wanted to talk. To understand why he would go behind my back like this. Maybe he needed help. Maybe he thought the house was vacant half the year and he deserved a shot. Maybe there was something I didn't know. But when he opened the door, he didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Well," he said, folding his arms. "Took you long enough." "What is this, Adam?" I asked, holding up the envelope. "It's what should have happened years ago," he said, without missing a beat. "You got to play house in the suburbs for over a decade while I was grinding in the city. You think that's fair?" "You didn't want the house," I said. "You left. You've never lifted a finger for it." "I paid the property tax out of my own bank account." He rolled his eyes. "You're acting like you own it." "You don't, Mike. Mom and Dad do. You're just squatting." That word, squatting, made something snap in me. I felt this heat crawl up my neck. "Squatting? Are you serious? I raised my son here. I buried our dog in that backyard. I fixed everything you all ignored. And I'm the one who convinced them to finally cash in," Adam said. "You really think they were going to let you have it forever?" I stood there, stunned. I couldn't decide if I wanted to punch him or cry. Maybe both. "You're unbelievable," I whispered. "You already make 6 figures. Why do you need the house too?" "Because I can," he said with a shrug. "And because you never learned how to play the game." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about need. This was about power. Adam wanted to win. He wanted to prove he was the better son, the more successful one. And he was using our parents to do it. That night, I sat in the living room, the lights dim, Josh asleep upstairs, and I just felt this heavy, suffocating silence. I didn't know what to do. I'd never fought a legal battle in my life. I was a high school English teacher with a modest salary and a broken heart. And now I was being dragged into court by the very people who once rocked me to sleep. I considered just leaving, packing up, finding a rental somewhere, starting over. But every time I looked at the crayon drawings on the fridge or the dent in the banister where Josh crashed his scooter, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not like this. They wanted a war. Then fine. But they had no idea what they'd started. And they had no idea what my son had saved without me ever knowing. I wish I could say the worst of it ended there, that the shock wore off and I settled into some calm, focused battle plan. But that's not how this kind of betrayal works. It doesn't hit you like a wave. It seeps in, slow and acidic, corroding every memory, every assumption you thought was safe. For weeks after I got served, I kept expecting my phone to buzz with a message from my mom saying, "This has gone too far," or "We didn't mean for it to come to this." But all I got was silence. No, that's not true. I got one message from her. It came about 5 days after I visited Adam. Just a single text. "Michael, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We still love you." Love? That word nearly made me laugh out loud. You don't evict someone you love without so much as a conversation. You don't pit one son against the other and then act like you're the victim. But even then, even as the anger built up in my chest, I still held on to some kind of desperate hope. I thought maybe this was all some warped misunderstanding. Maybe Adam had convinced them I was secretly renting the house out on Airbnb or letting it fall into disrepair. So I called my aunt, my mom's younger sister, Rachel, someone I trusted, someone who had always been more grounded than the rest of them. She picked up right away. "Michael," she said, her voice soft but careful. "I've been waiting for you to call." That was the first time I realized she already knew. She sighed before I could say a word and said, "I didn't want to get in the middle of it, but I told your mom this wasn't right." I sank into the couch, my free hand covering my face. "So it's not a misunderstanding? They really want to hand the house over to Adam?" "I don't think it was their idea at first," she said slowly. "Adam's been planting seeds for a long time, telling them you were freeloading, that you were never going to move out, that he could flip the house and reinvest it." I blinked. "Flip the house?" She hesitated. "He told them he could turn it into a luxury rental. Said the neighborhood's values were going up, and they'd be fools not to cash in before the market cools." It was like hearing someone talk about my home like it was just a set of numbers on a spreadsheet. A unit to be optimized. My blood boiled. Did they believe him? There was another long pause. Then, your dad thinks Adam knows more about business. Your mom? She's tired, Michael. She doesn't want drama. She thinks if you just go peacefully, everything will be fine. Go peacefully. Like I was some squatter in a standoff. I thanked Rachel and hung up, but I couldn't sleep that night. I kept pacing through the house, looking at every dent, every chipped corner, every paint color I'd chosen with my ex-wife when we were still pretending things were fine. It wasn't just a house. It was years of my life. It was memories. It was the one stable thing I had left after the divorce, after my ex moved halfway across the country and left me to raise Josh alone. And now even that was being taken from me. The next blow came a week later. I got a call from the school district. My principal, who's usually chipper and cracking jokes about her cats, sounded stiff. Hey, Michael. Just wanted to give you a heads up. About what? She hesitated. We got a letter from a law firm requesting employment verification, and it had a note attached. A question about whether you've ever used your school credentials to register public services under a false address. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. What? I've never. What does that even mean? She lowered her voice. I don't know what's going on, but it looked personal. They said it's part of a property dispute. Are you okay? I assured her I was. But I wasn't. Not even close. That was when I realized Adam wasn't just trying to win the case. He was trying to burn my credibility. He was hoping I'd crack, get fired, or lose custody of Josh. I'd never done anything close to what they were implying, but in a court battle, even the suggestion can taint you. Suddenly, I was reading every form I'd ever filled out, every school directory I'd signed, wondering if I had made some mistake years ago they'd now twist into a weapon. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every repair I'd done on the house, every bank statement showing I'd paid utilities and taxes. I found receipts from Home Depot going back to 2012. I printed emails from the city about a tree removal I'd handled when a branch fell during a storm. I wasn't going down without a fight. But the hardest part wasn't the legal prep. It was Josh. He could tell something was wrong. He's always been sensitive that way, observant. One night, while I was sorting papers in the dining room, he wandered in and asked, "Are we moving soon?" I looked up, startled. "Why would you ask that, buddy?" He shrugged, but his voice was small. "I heard you say court. That's where people go when someone's in trouble." I walked over, knelt beside him. "No one's in trouble. We're just working through something. But this is still your home." "Okay." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. A few days later, I got an invitation to a family brunch. From my mother. It was almost surreal. A printed card in an envelope with floral designs and a line that said, "Let's reconnect and talk. Just us." I almost didn't go, but I was desperate. Maybe she was coming to her senses. I left Josh with a friend and drove across town to the brunch spot. One of those upscale garden cafes where everything costs twice as much as it should and comes served on a slate instead of a plate. My mom was already there, sipping a mimosa. She stood and gave me a hug that felt more like a formality. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Are you?" I asked quietly. She sighed and sat back down. "Michael, this doesn't have to be ugly. We can resolve this without all the drama." "You mean me giving up and moving out?" I said flatly. She winced. "It's not about sides. Your father and I just want what's best for the family." I stared at her. "You think giving the house to Adam is what's best?" "He has plans," she said quickly. "He wants to renovate, maybe even live there eventually." You're not exactly going anywhere, Michael." That line hit me harder than I expected. "What does that mean?" She looked away. "You've been stuck since the divorce. You teach, you parent, but there's no growth, no ambition. Maybe this push will help you find something new." I sat there in stunned silence. She wasn't just trying to take my home. She genuinely thought it would be good for me. "Did Adam tell you to say that?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me. Did he write this whole brunch script for you? Did he coach you on how to make it sound like love while you stabbed me in the back?" Her mouth dropped open. "Michael, how dare you?" "No," I said, standing up. "How dare you? You told me to take care of that house. You said it would be mine. And now, because your golden child suddenly wants a rental property, I'm being treated like a parasite." "Watch your tone," she snapped, the mask slipping. I leaned in. "You watch your son, Mom. Because he's making enemies faster than you realize." I walked out before she could say another word. That night, Josh climbed into bed with me after a nightmare. He didn't say much, just curled up next to me like he used to when he was smaller. I stared at the ceiling, rage and heartbreak battling in my chest. I knew then, this wouldn't end with a peaceful talk. It was war now. A few weeks later, I got the official court date. And something strange happened. Josh started acting secretive. He'd vanish into his room with his tablet, headphones on, whispering to himself. I assumed he was playing a game or watching one of those endless YouTube videos about Minecraft, but one night I peeked in and saw him recording something, some kind of audio project. When he noticed me, he quickly turned it off. "What are you doing, buddy?" He shrugged. "Just something for school." I didn't press. My mind was elsewhere. Court was coming. The tension was rising. Adam had hired a team of attorneys. I had a lawyer I found through a friend, someone decent but not flashy. We prepped every night, going over documents, strategies, worst-case scenarios. And the worst part? My parents hadn't relented. Not once. In fact, they doubled down. My dad sent me a letter through his attorney accusing me of diminishing the property's value by turning the garage into a temporary office. My mom submitted a sworn affidavit claiming I had never received verbal promise of ownership. They both sat on the other side of that courtroom like strangers when the day finally came. But I didn't break. Because in the middle of the trial, just when everything seemed stacked against me, something happened. Josh, my quiet, thoughtful 7-year-old son, raised his hand and asked the judge if he could say something. And when the judge allowed it, Josh said, "Can I show the judge something my dad's never seen?" He pulled out his tablet, and what he played changed everything. I didn't even know Josh had been recording anything. He stood there, 7 years old, small in that giant courtroom, clutching his scratched-up tablet with the cracked corner. His voice trembled just a little when he said, "Can I show the judge something my dad's never seen?" I remember the judge, a woman named Honorable Judith Warren, looking over her glasses and gently nodding. "You may, young man, if it's relevant." Josh's thumb hovered over the play button for a second, like he was thinking through the weight of what he was about to do. Then he tapped it. At first, there was nothing, just static and background noise, the faint hum of a dishwasher, maybe. Then came voices, muffled, but clear enough. Adam's voice. "So when he's out, we send the contractors in. I already have a guy lined up to start demo. He can get the kitchen in a weekend." My spine straightened. The courtroom went silent. The judge raised an eyebrow. Where was this recorded? Josh looked at me, nervous now. At Christmas, when we went to Florida. I was hiding under the patio table with my tablet because I was bored. I didn't mean to record it. It just happened. The audio continued, clearer now. My mom's voice. "Tired. I still feel bad about it, Adam. He's lived there so long. I don't want to hurt him." "You're not hurting him," Adam said sharply. "You're setting boundaries. He's been playing the victim since the divorce. You want him in that house forever? Being pitted by everyone. I just don't want this to come back on us legally." "It won't," Adam said confidently. "Trust me. I've already talked to the lawyer. We get the court to evict him, transfer the deed, and then we list. He doesn't have the money to fight us." Silence again. Then my dad, sounding distant. "Let's just be careful. He's not stupid." Adam laughed. "He's an English teacher with a sad divorce and a soft kid. He won't fight. He folds. He always has." There was a gasp in the courtroom. I couldn't even tell who it came from. Josh quickly turned off the tablet. "That's all." The judge was stone still. She turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, did you have knowledge of this conversation?" I couldn't speak. I shook my head slowly. My throat was dry, and I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had turned white. My lawyer stood. "We'd like to enter this into evidence, Your Honor." Everything changed after that, but it didn't get easier. Court recessed for the day shortly after Josh's testimony. The judge needed time to review the recording, and the opposing counsel scrambled to issue objections, question the context, argue its legality, all of which our lawyer calmly countered. Josh had recorded it in a one-party consent state. It was admissible. Still, what hit me hardest wasn't the legal impact. It was hearing their voices like that. My family, plotting behind my back, talking about me like I was a burden, a loser, a roadblock. I knew Adam didn't respect me. That was old news. But hearing my mother, say she felt bad, while still going along with it, that destroyed something in me I didn't even know could break. I didn't go home right away. I took Josh out for ice cream, even though neither of us really had the appetite for it. He was quiet, sitting on the bench outside the shop, his feet swinging just above the pavement. "Was that okay?" he asked me, not looking up from his cone. "That I showed them?" I blinked, struggling to keep it together. I pulled him close. "Josh, you were brave. So brave. I didn't know you were keeping that." He looked down. "I thought you'd be mad." "Mad? Why would I be mad?" He bit his lip. "You always say not to spy, and not to listen to grown-up talk. That's not for me." I gave a broken laugh. "Yeah, I do say that." He looked up at me, serious now. "But they were being mean. To you. I didn't want them to win." I felt tears sting my eyes. I hadn't cried in years. Not when my ex left. Not when I found out about the lawsuit. But right there, on that bench, I broke a little. We sat there for a long time. When I finally dropped him off at school the next day and returned home, something felt off. At first, I couldn't place it. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw that the side gate was unlatched. That gate had a sticky lock. I always had to jiggle it twice. I knew I'd closed it the night before. Inside, the smell hit me first. Fresh paint. Chemical. Like primer. I walked through the house slowly, cautiously. That's when I saw it. The kitchen cabinets, half painted. Tools scattered on the counter. A new sink, still in its box, leaned against the wall. Dust everywhere. I wasn't imagining it. Someone had started demo. I grabbed my phone and checked the security app. I'd never installed a camera inside the house. Only outside, facing the front porch and driveway. But the app showed something chilling. Two men, clearly visible, entering the side yard at 6:42 a.m. A white van behind them. They wore contractor uniforms. One of them had a clipboard. I called the number listed on the van's side, a local home improvement company. When I asked who ordered the work at my address, the receptionist paused. Let me check." 2 minutes later, she returned. "Yes, that would be Mr. Adam Bennett. He confirmed this work order 2 weeks ago. We were told it was a vacant property under remodel." I hung up without another word. That was the moment the line was crossed. The moment I knew Adam wasn't just trying to win. He was actively violating the law, acting as if he already owned the house. He sent contractors into my home, while my son and I were asleep. I called the police. The officers came quickly. They confirmed the work order and spoke to the workers, who had already left by the time they arrived. But without clear proof of trespassing intent, it was hard to press charges. Still, they filed a report and advised me to change the locks and install interior cameras. I followed their advice that same day. I also called my lawyer. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore," I said. "This is criminal trespass. He's trying to force me out by making the house unlivable." My lawyer agreed. We added it to the list of evidence for the next court session. But that night, something inside me collapsed. I sat in Josh's room while he slept and just stared at the walls. The posters. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The tiny bookshelf where his favorite dinosaur books lived. I imagined him walking in from school one day to find strangers tearing apart our kitchen. Or worse, walking in on them. I felt powerless. Violated. Then, I got a text. From Adam. "You're dragging this out longer than you need to. Everyone knows you're not winning. Why not make this easy on the kid?" No greeting. No signature. Just that. And something about the wording. The kid, like Josh wasn't even a person, just a pawn, made me snap. I wrote back. "If you ever send anyone into my house again, I will press charges and file for a restraining order. You crossed a line." He responded a minute later. "You don't get it. This isn't about you. It's about them. They're not giving it to you, Mike. Wake up." He was right about one thing. It wasn't just him anymore. The next day, I received a letter from my parents' lawyer. It accused me of sabotaging ongoing renovations and tampering with contractor access. It warned that if I interfered again, they would seek damages. They were blaming me for stopping the unauthorized work in my own home. I called my mother. She didn't answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. I even emailed them both, attaching photos of the mess left behind and the police report. No response. And then, another betrayal. Josh's school. I was pulled into a meeting with the principal, school counselor, and, to my surprise, a representative from Child Protective Services. Apparently, someone had submitted an anonymous tip alleging that Josh was living in unsafe housing conditions and exposed to legal conflict without protection. I was livid. The social worker was kind. She could tell the situation was retaliatory, but she still had to follow protocol. She visited our home, inspected each room, took notes, asked questions. When she left, she patted my shoulder and said, "I believe you. But this kind of thing, it happens more than you'd think. People weaponize the system when they want control." I thanked her, but I felt numb. That night, Josh asked if we were still safe, if someone was going to take him away. I held him tight and said, "No, no one is taking you anywhere. This is our home, and we're going to fight for it." But deep down, I was breaking. I'd been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me, lied to, manipulated, humiliated, and now they were trying to take my son away, or at least scare me into thinking they could. That's when I stopped hoping they'd see reason. That's when I started planning revenge. The day after the court recording played, I woke up with a strange mix of hope and dread. Hope, because Josh's recording had blown open the truth. The judge saw it. The lawyers heard it. Even the gallery, packed with quiet, observant strangers, had gasped when Adam's voice crackled through the tablet. But dread because, deep down, I knew Adam wouldn't go quietly. Not after being exposed. And he didn't. If anything, the betrayal that followed was colder, more calculating, and far more personal. It started subtly. The first real blow came 3 days later when I opened my bank app and saw a $0 balance in my checking account. My stomach dropped. I'd had over $2,000 in there. Not much, but enough to get through the week. Panicked, I called the bank. After being bounced around between departments, I finally landed on a fraud rep who told me, with robotic calm, there was a hold placed on your account due to a flagged identity verification discrepancy. What does that mean? I asked, pacing my living room. It appears someone submitted a form stating your identity was compromised. Your social security number was attached to a different address. We're required to freeze the funds pending verification. What address? I asked sharply. She hesitated. We're not allowed to disclose that until the investigation concludes. You'll receive a letter in the mail with the case details. I didn't need the letter. I knew what address they had used. Adam had taken it a step further, from false accusations about the house to now interfering with my livelihood. For 2 weeks, I had to operate without access to my own money. I borrowed a bit from my friend Mark to cover groceries and gas. Every swipe of my debit card felt like a gamble. Josh noticed the tension. I tried to shield him from it, but kids pick up on more than we realize. "Why don't we go out for pizza like we used to?" he asked one night. I lied. Because I'm saving up for something special. I didn't tell him that the something special was trying not to lose our home. And then came the knock at the door. It was a Saturday morning. Josh was watching cartoons on the couch, wrapped in a dinosaur blanket, when someone banged on the front door, hard. 3 uniformed men stood outside. A fourth one, in a suit, stepped forward when I opened it. "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes. We're with the County Housing Board. We've received a formal complaint about squatters in this residence. We're here to inspect the property." I blinked. "Squatters? I live here." The man in the suit pulled out a folder. "The owners of record have filed a claim stating this property has been unlawfully occupied for over a year. They submitted photographic evidence of structural neglect and cited health hazards." I nearly laughed. "Structural? Look, this is a mistake. I'm in the middle of a court dispute with my brother. He's trying to claim the house. He's making this all up." But they were already writing things down, peeking past me into the house. "Sir, you can explain this to the inspector. We'll need to walk through the property." They walked into my home like I didn't exist. One of them even opened the fridge, checking expiration dates. Another went into the backyard, taking photos of the deck. After 30 minutes, they left. One handed me a yellow slip, pending review for housing code violation. They were threatening to condemn the property. That night, after putting Josh to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall. The same wall I had repainted 6 years ago, after a pipe burst, and I had to re-drywall the entire section by myself. I remembered scraping away mold, installing new insulation, driving to Home Depot twice in one day because I bought the wrong nails. And now, that wall was apparently part of a hazardous dwelling. Adam wasn't just fighting dirty. He was erasing me, erasing everything I'd built. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I stopped responding to most texts, even from friends who meant well. I withdrew from staff lunches at school, stopped showing up to the Thursday trivia nights at the bar down the street. The walls of the house began to feel closer, heavier. I started to question whether I was losing. Not just the legal case, but me. The quiet, stable, dependable person I used to be. I was unraveling. The only thing keeping me anchored was Josh. Even in the middle of chaos, he somehow stayed bright. Innocent. He built Lego castles on the floor like our whole world wasn't on fire. And sometimes, when I was sure he wasn't watching, I'd just look at him and think, I can't fall apart. Not yet. One evening, I found him sitting at my desk, scribbling something in a spiral notebook. When I asked what he was doing, he flipped it shut quickly and grinned. It's a secret project, he said. You'll see. I smiled. It was the first time I'd done that in days. But behind the smile, I was unraveling. I was hitting rock bottom. And then, I got a phone call. It was from Rachel, my aunt, my mother's sister. The one who'd warned me early on. Michael, she said gently. I didn't want to call, but I have to tell you something. My heart dropped. What? I had lunch with your mom today. I held my breath. She told me she and your father are preparing to sign over power of attorney to Adam. I stood, knocking over a chair. What? She said he convinced them it was easier that way. Said he'd handle everything. The house, the finances, even their medical directives. Michael, this isn't just about the house anymore. I couldn't believe it. Adam was consolidating control. He wasn't just coming for my home. He was coming for them. For everything. And they were letting him. Rachel lowered her voice. I don't know what he promised them, but he's been manipulating them for years. Your dad thinks he's some kind of financial genius. Your mom just wants to keep the peace. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. Listen, she said. I'll help how I can. But if they sign over power of attorney, Adam can make real decisions on their behalf. You need to stop him before that happens. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. I wasn't just in a legal battle anymore. I was in a war for my family's future, even the ones betraying me. That night, after putting Josh to sleep, I opened a Google Doc. I titled it, The Plan, and I started writing. Not a revenge plot. Not yet. Not exactly. But something was taking shape. A quiet, patient blueprint. If Adam wanted to win by force, I would beat him with patience. With evidence. With restraint. I had something he didn't. Discipline. And community. I started making lists. Every repair I'd done on the house. Every bill I'd paid. Every contractor I'd hired. Witnesses who had seen me living there. Photos of Josh growing up in that house. Birthday parties, first steps, Christmas mornings. I called an old friend of mine, Ben, who worked as a paralegal years ago before opening a small investigative service. We met over coffee. I told him everything. Ben leaned back in his chair and said, You know, if your brother has any skeletons in his closet, now's the time to start rattling them. I didn't want to go there at first, but Ben was right. I couldn't afford to fight fair while Adam burned every bridge. He handed me a card. You didn't hear this from me, but this guy knows how to pull credit history, property investments, even off-the-books leases. It felt wrong. Spying. Digging. But then I remembered the contractors in my home. The bank account freeze. The CPS report. The attempt to take my son away. All bets were off. I would rise from rock bottom. Not with rage, but with strategy. With silence. With a long, slow knife. It's funny how rock bottom gives you clarity. I used to think clarity would come from calm, from meditation or long walks or whatever nonsense Adam posted in his shirtless Instagram monologues. But for me, it came from sitting in the dark at 2 a.m. after months of betrayal, staring at a cracked kitchen tile I couldn't afford to replace, and thinking, I've got nothing left to lose. That's when I stopped reacting and started building. I called out sick from work for 3 days. Not because I was unwell, but because I needed time to get strategic. This wasn't a legal case anymore. It was a power struggle, and I was done being the one at the mercy of everyone else's decisions. Step 1. Get smart. Ben, my old paralegal friend, connected me with a man named Troy. He was ex-military, ex-private investigator, and exactly the kind of guy you'd want on your side when someone's trying to erase your life one forged document at a time. Troy wasn't cheap, but he agreed to a payment plan after I explained everything. He listened to me without judgment, just nodded, occasionally jotting things down. So, he said after an hour, you want me to find dirt on your brother? I want to know what he's hiding, I said. Because a guy like Adam, someone who plays as dirty as he does, doesn't get through life spotless. Troy smirked. They never do. By the end of that week, Troy had already discovered that Adam owned 2 LLCs registered under different names, one in Delaware, one in Nevada. Both were tied to rental properties in rough shape. One had been sued last year for mold-related health violations. The other had been quietly bought through a cash deal that raised some red flags with local housing inspectors. He also found social media messages, cached posts, and screenshots that Adam had deleted, mocking tenants and bragging about renting dumps to desperate families. I didn't even know where to begin with that. "I'm going to print all of this," I told my lawyer. "Let's bring it to court." But she shook her head. "Not yet. Let's wait until the next hearing. Hit them all at once." She was right. Step 2. Go on the offensive. I filed a restraining order against Adam for the unauthorized contractor intrusion. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but the fact that he'd let strangers into a residence with a child inside gave us leverage. The housing code violation threat? That backfired. After the inspector returned and saw my documentation, he not only withdrew the violation, he made a formal note in the county records that the original complaint had lacked sufficient evidence and appeared retaliatory. Even better, I got a letter in the mail a week later from CPS. The complaint had been unsubstantiated. The case was closed. I'd kept my composure during their visit. I had been kind, cooperative. Josh had told them, in his sweet, earnest voice, "My dad always makes sure I'm safe." That was what did it. I framed that letter. Step 3. Tell the story. Up until now, I'd kept quiet on social media. I wasn't the kind of guy to air family drama online. But Adam had painted me as a squatter. He'd told people I was taking advantage of my parents. So I posted a simple, public message on Facebook. Just the facts. For those who've asked, yes, I'm in the middle of a legal battle. My parents are attempting to evict me from the home I've lived in, raised my son in, and maintained for over a decade. My brother, who has never lived in this house or paid a single bill toward it, is trying to claim it as a financial asset. I've kept quiet out of respect for my family, but silence only helps abusers. I'm fighting this, not just for me, but for Josh. Thank you to everyone who's reached out. The post went semi-viral, at least within our small town. Former neighbors commented. My old high school teacher. Even a few of my dad's old co-workers. The general sentiment was clear. "I remember when you painted that porch yourself. Your kid plays with mine. This is awful. Your brother's a snake, man. Sorry you're dealing with this." It wasn't a legal win, but it was a narrative win. And narrative, I was learning, was everything. Step 4. Make it hurt. While Adam had been busy trashing my name and buying off contractors, he hadn't been watching his own backyard. Troy sent me photos of one of Adam's rental properties, the one tied to his Nevada LLC. The roof was caved in. Multiple code violations. A fire hazard. Worse, one of the tenants had filed a complaint, and Adam had never responded. That tenant, a single mom named Keisha, had been threatened with eviction when she complained about black mold in her bathroom. Troy found her and got her to agree to a signed statement. That was my ace in the hole. I'd wait until court to use it. And in the meantime, I rebuilt. I didn't mean just the legal case. I mean me. I started sleeping again. I reconnected with friends. I began waking up early to journal, something my therapist had recommended during my divorce, but I'd never truly committed to. Josh noticed the change too. "You're not sad anymore," he said one morning while eating cereal. "I was never sad," I said with a smile. "Just a little tired." He nodded like he understood. "You're like a superhero who had a charge." He wasn't wrong. I also started fixing the house again, not because I thought it would sway the court, but because it was mine. I routed the tiles. I sanded and repainted the banister. I finally cleaned out the garage, something I'd put off for years, and turned it into a small workspace. Josh and I started building things together on weekends. Birdhouses, Lego contraptions, little woodworking projects. And every night, I added more to my Google Doc. Timelines, receipts, quotes from neighbors, screenshots, letters of support. I even got a notarized statement from the guy who'd sold me the HVAC unit 5 years ago, confirming it had been paid for in full by me. I was rebuilding my case from the inside out. And as I did, my confidence grew. One day, out of the blue, I got a text from my mother. "Michael, can we talk? Please." I didn't answer right away. In fact, I let it sit there for 2 days. Then I responded, "Only if Adam's not involved. No more group ambushes." She replied immediately, "Just me. Tomorrow. Lunch." Part of me wanted to say no, but curiosity won. We met at a park, not a restaurant. Neutral ground. She looked older than I remembered, tired, fragile. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was guilt. But when she saw me, she smiled. I miss you, she said softly. I didn't reply. She sat down on the bench. Your father and I, we didn't expect it to get this far. I let out a quiet laugh. You hired a lawyer and filed for eviction. That's not something that just happens. She looked at her hands. Adam said we had to. He said if we didn't act fast, you'd claim squatters' rights and take the house away from us. I stared at her. Do you hear how insane that sounds? You think I'd steal from you? She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. No, I don't. I didn't know what to believe anymore. You believed him, I said. You always have. She nodded slowly. We made a mistake. We sat in silence. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I'm thinking of rescinding the power of attorney. I turned to her. What? I haven't signed anything yet. But Adam's been pushing. Too hard. And after that recording Josh played. I see it now. He doesn't want to help us. He wants control. I leaned back on the bench. Finally, a crack in their armor. Then don't sign it. I said. It's not too late. She nodded. I'll talk to your father. But I wasn't relying on her anymore. If she did the right thing, great. If not, I was still winning. Because the final hearing was approaching. The judge had scheduled it as a multi-day proceeding to wrap everything up. And my lawyer and I were ready. The new plan? Show every receipt. Present every signed statement. Expose Adam's sketchy property dealings. Then, and only then, bring in Keisha's testimony. And if things went well, maybe, just maybe, end it with something no one expected. Because Troy had found something else. Something I hadn't told my lawyer yet. Something that could shatter Adam's credibility in one blow. But that would wait for the final day. Because now, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the courtroom. I owned it. The courthouse had stopped feeling like a threat. It felt more like a stage now, and I was finally ready to perform. After months of lies, betrayals, secret recordings, and weaponized legal filings, the final hearing was just a week away. But this time, I wasn't scared. Not because I thought I had it all figured out. Trust me, I still woke up at 3 a.m. some nights panicking about losing the house. But because I finally had leverage. And I knew how to use it. The courtroom is where truth gets wrapped in strategy. Adam had been throwing punches in the dark for months, hoping something would stick. But now I had structure, evidence, a narrative, and more importantly, I had time working in my favor. Because the longer this dragged out, the more his own arrogance began to expose him. It started with a phone call. Troy, my PI, rang me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my classroom, cleaning whiteboard markers off my hands, when my phone buzzed. You got a second? He asked. For you? Always. He didn't waste time. I found a bank statement that might interest you, he said. Not Adam's, but your parents'. It's public because they signed a shared mortgage in Nevada years ago, and there's a lien filed against it for non-payment. I blinked. Wait, my parents are in debt. More than you think. That second home Adam talked them into buying, the investment condo in Henderson, it's underwater. And Adam convinced them to take out a reverse mortgage to cover the difference. I felt my stomach twist. Are you serious? They're up to their necks, Michael. And guess who the loan officer was? I didn't answer. I already knew. Adam, Troy confirmed. Through a shell financial advisory firm he opened 2 years ago. That was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about the house. Adam was trying to liquidate everything, my parents included. He'd positioned himself as their financial savior, convinced them to sign over power of attorney, though they hadn't yet, and now he was maneuvering their assets like chess pieces. The house I lived in wasn't the prize. It was just the first domino. If I left quietly, he'd flip it, sell their condo, consolidate control of their accounts, and then what? I could see the end game now. He was planning to drain them dry. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to me, and not to them. Even after everything they'd done. I asked Troy for every document he could dig up. Bank transfers, legal filings, even Adam's promotional materials for his so-called financial firm. Within 2 days, I had a fat folder of evidence and a 12-slide presentation my lawyer helped me prep for the final hearing. But even with that locked and loaded, I wanted more. Something devastating. Something personal. Then, as if the universe decided to give me an early Christmas gift, I got a call from Keisha, the tenant from Adam's Nevada property. I've been thinking about our conversation, she said, and I want to help. You already signed a statement, I told her. That was brave. No, she said. I want to testify. In person. If you'll let me. I was stunned. You do that? I want people to see what kind of man he really is, she said. He threatened to evict me when I told him there was mold. He wouldn't fix the leak, wouldn't return my messages. My daughter got sick, Michael. I didn't know why at first, but the doctor found it. Black mold spores in her lungs. I had to break the lease just to get out. I can't afford a lawyer, but I can stand in front of a judge. That was when I knew. This wasn't just a revenge arc anymore. It was justice. My lawyer filed a motion to allow Keisha to testify, since her experience directly pertained to Adam's pattern of property mismanagement, and since he was vying for ownership of a property with a minor in it. The judge approved it. Adam didn't see it coming. He thought this would be a 3-day affair of dry paperwork and witness statements. He thought he'd lean on my parents' testimony and ride the wave of bloodline loyalty. But he'd underestimated the quiet fire of someone who'd been cornered for too long. The more you push a man like me, the more dangerous he becomes. Then something unexpected happened. My father called. Not my mom. Not Rachel. My dad. I hadn't spoken to him directly in over 2 months. Michael, he said stiffly. We need to talk. I stayed silent. Let him sit in it. Your mother told me about your concerns. About the reverse mortgage. About Adam. I waited. You should have come to me earlier, he said. I let out a small laugh. Like the last time I called. And you let it go to voicemail? He sighed. I didn't know all the details. But we've had second thoughts. About the power of attorney? Yes, he said. And about the house. I didn't jump. I didn't get hopeful. I just listened. I think we need to go over some things, he said. Face to face. We met the next evening at a small diner near their retirement community. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. Like whatever illusion of Adam being their savior had finally cracked. He came in with a manila envelope and slid it across the table. I opened it. Inside were copies of the reverse mortgage, a list of loans Adam had encouraged them to take, and, at the bottom, a new notarized statement revoking the pending power of attorney transfer. I don't know what game Adam's playing, my dad said, but I'm starting to realize he doesn't care who he burns. You were right. I stayed quiet for a long time. Then I said, I'm still going to court. He nodded. I know. And I'm still fighting for the house. He hesitated, then said, maybe it's time it belonged to someone who actually treated it like home. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was close. The final piece of the setup came 3 days later. Troy called again. I've got it, he said. Got what? Something your brother never wanted you to find. Apparently, Adam had once used my parents' address, my house's address, as a proof of residency for a business application back in 2018. But not just any business. One tied to a government pandemic relief grant during COVID. He claimed the property was a low-income rental unit. Filed for funds. Got approved. But here's the kicker. The grant terms required the applicant to own the property outright. And at that time, my parents still held the deed, which meant Adam had committed fraud. On a federal form, Troy got the application. It had Adam's signature, the fake rental agreement, and even a fake tenant name, James A., with a blurry lease document listing rent at $1,200 per month. It was all falsified. We didn't go to the authorities, not yet. Instead, my lawyer included it in a sealed envelope to the judge, labeled Exhibit D, Supplemental Evidence, Rebuttal to Claim of Responsible Ownership. The trap was set. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even about vengeance anymore. It was about proving, publicly and irrevocably, that Adam wasn't fit to own a backyard swing set, let alone a house with a child in it. And it was about proving, finally, that I wasn't the problem. That I was the only one holding everything together while everyone else was playing games. The hearing was scheduled for Monday. 3 days. And for once, I was ready. Not just ready to defend. Ready to win. Courtroom 2B was packed on Monday morning. Not with a huge audience. Just the usual people. A couple legal clerks, a few curious attorneys waiting on their cases, my parents sitting stiffly in the second row, and Adam, smug in a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But still, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. This was the day it would all unfold. I showed up early, wearing the same suit I'd worn to my wedding 12 years ago. It still fit, barely. I figured that was symbolic, something old, something from when I believed in family, now repurposed to protect what little I had left of it. Josh wasn't there. I left him with Rachel for the day. He'd already done his part, braver than most adults ever could be. He didn't need to see the final act. This was mine. My lawyer, Vanessa, looked like she hadn't slept, but she was all sharp lines and calm focus. She patted my shoulder as I sat beside her. Ready? As I'll ever be. The judge entered, Honorable Judith Warren, and immediately cut through the noise like a scalpel. Let's proceed, she said. Today we will hear the final arguments and witness testimony regarding Bennett versus Bennett regarding the ownership and occupancy of the property located at 417 West Maple Avenue. Adam's lawyer started with the same tired speech he'd rehearsed for weeks. Your Honor, this property has remained legally in the name of Ronald and Diane Bennett. Our client, Adam Bennett, has been granted written authorization by the owners to act on their behalf. Mr. Michael Bennett, while residing at the property, has made no formal arrangements for ownership, rent, or title transfer. He is, by all legal definitions, a tenant at will. Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't even take notes. She'd heard it all before. So had I. Then it was our turn. She stood. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate not only that Mr. Michael Bennett has a legitimate claim to equitable interest in the property due to years of consistent investment, occupancy, and care, but also that the plaintiff, Adam Bennett, has acted in bad faith, used manipulative tactics to gain control, and is fundamentally unfit to take ownership of the property in question. The judge raised an eyebrow. You'll have to back that with more than sentiment, counsel. Vanessa smiled. We intend to. The first hour was foundational. Vanessa laid out the receipts, taxes paid, utilities, structural repairs, all from my accounts. Photos of birthday parties, Halloween decorations, even Josh's first steps taken in that same living room. She highlighted that my parents had never collected rent, never asked for it, and never treated the home as anything but Michael's responsibility, even in their own emails. Then came the neighbors, 2 of them. One testified they hadn't seen my parents in years. The other spoke about watching me shovel that driveway every single storm for over a decade, never missing a beat. That's his house, she said. Anyone can see that. But it was Keisha's testimony that changed everything. When she walked in, early 30s, nervous but composed, Adam visibly flinched. His jaw tightened. His lawyer turned and whispered something. She took the stand. Miss Jefferson, Vanessa began. Can you explain how you know Mr. Adam Bennett? I rented a property from him last year, she said. He listed it through a company called Redwood Urban Holdings. I found it online. And what was your experience? Her voice wavered, but she held firm. There was black mold. In the bathroom, under the sink, spreading into the hallway. My daughter started having breathing problems. I sent pictures, left messages. He didn't respond for 3 weeks. When I finally got through, he told me to find somewhere else if I didn't like it. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Did he ever resolve the issue? No, she said. I had to break the lease. He kept my deposit. Vanessa let the silence sit. Then she said, Your Honor, we have documentation, dated photos, medical reports, and a signed rental agreement, showing that this incident took place under one of Mr. Bennett's business entities. Adam's lawyer stood. Irrelevant. This has no bearing on the Maple Avenue property. But Vanessa was ready. It shows a pattern, Your Honor. A pattern of neglect, deception, and lack of accountability. The plaintiff is vying for control of a property where a child currently resides. The same plaintiff who failed to maintain a safe environment for a child tenant elsewhere. This is directly relevant to the question of responsible ownership. The judge paused. Sustained. Continue. Adam's face turned the color of wet clay. Then Vanessa played her final card. She approached the bench and handed over the sealed envelope. Your Honor, this is Exhibit D, a recently discovered application for a government grant submitted by Adam Bennett, declaring the Maple Avenue property as a rental unit, despite having no legal claim to it and no record of any rental activity. We believe this constitutes misrepresentation and potentially fraud. The courtroom went still. The judge opened the envelope. Read. Then looked up slowly. Mr. Bennett, would you care to respond to this claim? Adam stood, visibly sweating. That document was an early proposal. Nothing came of it. I never followed through. Vanessa struck. The funds were dispersed, Your Honor. We have records of the deposit, and we've confirmed that the grant terms required ownership of the property. This is not an early proposal. This is an executed document, signed, processed, and paid. Adam's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. I'll decide what's admissible." She looked back at the paper. "I assume, Ms. Jefferson, this document has also been sent to the appropriate federal authorities?" Vanessa didn't blink. "Yes, Your Honor, as a matter of civic duty." And just like that, Adam Bennett's entire facade cracked. He slumped in his seat, eyes darting between his parents, his attorney, and the floor. My mother closed her eyes. My father looked at his hands. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to say anything before we conclude today's hearing?" I stood slowly. I hadn't planned to speak, but something inside me knew I needed to. I didn't give a speech. I didn't lash out. I just said this. I didn't ask for this fight. I never wanted to take my family to court. I spent 12 years in that house raising my son, fixing what broke, and building a life after mine fell apart. I thought that mattered. I still do. All I want is to keep a roof over my child's head, a roof I've earned, brick by brick. And I hope, someday, we can all find peace. But not at the cost of being trampled. The judge nodded. She turned her chair slightly, writing something down. Then she said the words I'll never forget. "This court will reconvene in 48 hours for the formal ruling. But in light of the new evidence presented today, I am issuing a temporary injunction prohibiting any change of ownership, construction, or legal filings related to the property at 417 West Maple Avenue." Adam's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, I must protest." "Sit down, counselor," she said, without looking up. And just like that, Adam's plan collapsed. The revenge wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was methodical, measured, and completely devastating. He left the courtroom that day without speaking to anyone, not our parents, not his lawyer, not even the press that had started to sniff around outside. Keisha shook my hand on the way out and said, "He deserved that." I just nodded, but I wasn't smiling yet, because the final verdict was still to come, and I had one last card left to play. The final day of court felt like the eye of a storm. Calm, but only because every piece had already been thrown into the wind. I sat there in my old suit, hands folded, watching Adam squirm in his tailored one. His usual confidence was gone, the smirk replaced by silence. His lawyer barely looked at him, and for the first time, my parents weren't sitting behind him. They were behind me. My dad, stone-faced. My mom, pale and quiet, twisting a tissue in her hands. Rachel sat with them, arms crossed, her chin high. Judge Warren entered briskly and wasted no time. "This court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and documentation related to the dispute over 417 West Maple Avenue. We will now proceed with a final ruling." I didn't breathe. In matters of property, the law prioritizes ownership, contractual obligations, and intent. While it is true that the deed to the Maple Avenue property remains in the name of Ronald and Diane Bennett, the court recognizes that over the past 12 years, the defendant, Michael Bennett, has demonstrated continuous, exclusive use and maintenance of the residence. The plaintiffs provided no lease, no documentation requesting rent, and no communication suggesting that the defendant's occupancy was intended to be temporary. Adam stiffened. I saw his jaw clench. Furthermore, the judge continued, "This court finds the actions of Adam Bennett to be not only misleading, but potentially criminal. Submitting fraudulent information on a government loan application, misrepresenting property ownership, and interfering with lawful occupancy constitute serious violations. This evidence, though outside the immediate scope of this property dispute, casts doubt on Mr. Adam Bennett's credibility and character." She paused, looked over her glasses. "Accordingly, the court grants the defendant, Michael Bennett, equitable interest in the property and rules in favor of initiating a transfer of title under the doctrine of constructive trust. This effectively grants Mr. Bennett legal ownership of 417 West Maple Avenue." My heart dropped, then soared. It was done. I had won. I closed my eyes and took the deepest breath I'd taken in months. My lawyer put a hand on my arm and whispered, "You did it." But the judge wasn't finished. "In addition," she said, "the court strongly recommends that Ronald and Diane Bennett seek independent legal counsel regarding their financial entanglements with Adam Bennett. Based on the exhibits provided, including Exhibit D, the court has submitted a recommendation to federal authorities to open an investigation into the use of pandemic relief funds by Adam Bennett and his business entities." Gasps. From the gallery. From my parents. Even from the court clerk. Adam stood suddenly. That's not even." The judge cut him off. Mr. Bennett, I suggest you remain silent. Anything you say can now be subject to criminal investigation. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back into his seat. The gavel came down. It was over. Afterward, people shuffled out quietly. Some whispered. Some stared. I stayed seated, letting the noise fade around me. Vanessa leaned down and said, "There will be paperwork. We'll file the title transfer immediately. But today it's yours." She was right. The house was mine. Legally. Permanently. And the truth? It didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. It felt like relief. Adam stormed out without a word. Didn't even look back. Not at me. Not at our parents. Not at anyone. His future, whatever it looked like now, was no longer my concern. But my parents lingered. I turned slowly as they approached. My mom's eyes were red. My dad's shoulders sagged. They looked smaller somehow, like the roles had reversed. "We didn't see it," my mom whispered. "We didn't want to believe he'd do that." I nodded. "You believed in him. I get it." My dad cleared his throat. "You saved the house. You saved us, too, even if we didn't deserve it." There was nothing to say to that. Not yet. Maybe one day. Rachel stepped forward, fierce and loyal as ever, and gave me a hug so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "Proud of you, kid," she said. "Proud of you for not stooping to his level." Josh wasn't in the courtroom, but when I picked him up that afternoon, he ran out of Rachel's house holding something behind his back. "Close your eyes," he shouted. I laughed and obeyed. When I opened them, he was holding a crayon drawing of our house, crooked and messy, but perfect in every way. On the lawn were two stick figures, him and me. He'd drawn a banner over the front door. It said, "We live here forever." I knelt down and hugged him tight. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt home. My name's Nolan, and I turned 24 a few months ago. I used to think my family was normal, messy, sure, but normal in that sitcom kind of way. You know, the kind where people yell a lot, but still hug it out at the end of the day. Turns out, sitcoms don't prepare you for when your dad slams his fist on the dinner table and tells you that you've never earned your place in this family. That night changed everything. But the truth is, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the last straw in a pile that had been building since I was old enough to realize some people only love you when it's convenient. I grew up in a small town where everyone knows everyone. My parents, Alan and Marjorie, were the kind of couple people admired, or at least pretended to. Dad worked as a contractor, the type of guy who could build a house from scratch, and Mom was a real estate agent who somehow managed to make every conversation about her network. Together they had my older brother, Ethan, and me. Ethan was 3 years older, taller, better looking, and somehow always right. The golden boy. The one who could wreck the car and get a pat on the back because at least he's honest about it. Meanwhile, if I forgot to take out the trash once, it was a week-long lecture about responsibility and gratitude. Growing up, it was like living under two different sets of rules. Ethan's mistakes were learning experiences, but mine were disappointments. I learned early on to keep my head down, stay quiet, and work hard. I didn't ask for much, not money, not favors, not even help with college applications. When I finally did leave for college, I paid for it myself. Scholarships, part-time jobs, whatever it took. My parents called it wanting independence. I called it survival. I got my degree in finance and managed to land a decent job right out of school. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to rent a small apartment and keep up with my student loans. I visited home occasionally, usually on holidays, but the visits always ended the same way. Some comment from Dad about how I thought I was better than everyone else just because I moved out. I'd laugh it off, smile, and then go back to my apartment where I could finally breathe. But last summer, things shifted. My dad's contracting business started slowing down, and Ethan had just moved back home after his third failed startup attempt. Suddenly, I wasn't just the independent one. I was the one they started calling when bills got tight. It started small. Mom asked if I could temporarily help cover their electric bill. Then the next month, it was the car insurance. By the third month, she was casually asking if I could just pay it directly since it was easier that way. I knew what was happening. I was becoming their safety net. The same family that told me I was too good for them now needed me to keep their lights on. Still, I helped. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of some leftover hope that they'd see I wasn't the selfish one they painted me to be. It wasn't like I was rolling in money, but I could afford to help, and honestly, It felt good to do something useful. But what I didn't expect was how quickly they'd start acting like it was owed to them. My mom would call me every few days to check in, but it always circled back to something she needed. My dad barely said thank you. Ethan, on the other hand, acted like I was just contributing to our family fund. He'd laugh and say, "Hey, you're finally pulling your weight, little brother." I started to resent every call, every request, every fake smile. Then came the night of the dinner. The one I can still hear like a bad recording in my head. I'd gone home for my mom's birthday because she made me promise to. The house felt smaller than I remembered, maybe because it was filled with tension that clung to the air. Ethan had just announced he was starting another business, this time a crypto consulting agency, and my parents were practically glowing with pride. My dad raised his glass to him, bragging about how Ethan never gives up. I forced a smile, but inside I was thinking about the last few months of rent and bills I'd quietly covered for them, while Ethan blew through his savings on big ideas. When my mom turned to me and asked, "So, Nolan, are you finally saving for something real, like a house?" I just said, "Yeah, actually, I've been looking into getting one soon." I didn't mean it as a jab, but my dad's smile froze. "A house? On your own?" he said, like I'd confessed to a crime. "That's ambitious." My mom chimed in. "Well, maybe wait a bit until things settle down with the market. Or you could get something closer to home. Help out more around here." The way she said it, help out, it didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like an expectation. I tried to keep my tone calm. "I think I've helped out plenty already," I said. Ethan laughed. "Oh, come on. Don't act like you're carrying the family, dude. You're just doing your part." My dad nodded. "Exactly. Family means everyone contributes." That was when something in me started to crack. I looked at them, all three, and realized they genuinely believed I owed them. Not gratitude, not love, but money. My dad leaned forward and said, "You act like this family owes you something, but you've never earned your place here." It hit harder than I expected, maybe because I'd spent my whole life trying to earn that place. I asked, "What do you mean by that?" And he slammed his fist on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "You think you're better than us because you got a fancy degree and a job in the city. But when it comes down to it, this family carried you. We raised you. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us." My mom didn't say a word. Ethan just sat there smirking like he'd won something. I felt heat rise in my chest, that kind of slow, burning anger that comes when someone twists the truth so far you start doubting your own memory. I told him, "I've been helping pay your mortgage for months, Dad." He shot back, "Because you owe us that much. You think you got where you are without us." The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. That's when he said it, the line that would echo in my head for weeks after. "If you want to be so independent, then get out. Don't come back here expecting anything from us." I stood up. My chair scraped against the tile, loud enough to make Mom flinch. "Okay," I said quietly. "I won't." I grabbed my jacket, walked out, and didn't look back. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd call the next day to apologize. But they didn't. Not for a week, not for two. Just silence. And in that silence, I made a decision. One that would come back to haunt them in ways they never saw coming. That decision started with a single phone call and a few numbers on a screen that would change everything. But before I made that call, I needed to make sure I could live with what was about to happen. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It's the sound of everything they took for granted slowly slipping through their fingers. That was the night I started planning. The days after that dinner felt strangely calm, almost too calm, like the eye of a storm I didn't know was still circling overhead. I remember sitting in my apartment that next morning, staring at my phone, half expecting a text from my mom. Something simple, maybe, "Your father didn't mean it," or "Let's talk this through." But nothing came. Just silence. Not even a missed call. I tried to tell myself I was fine with that I didn't need them to reach out. But the truth is, silence can be its own kind of noise. It hums at the back of your mind until you start questioning if you're the problem after all. So I threw myself into work. I stayed late, volunteered for extra projects, anything to drown out the ache. My job was stable, decent pay, a quiet office full of people who smiled at you because they wanted to, not because they needed something. I liked that. I even started saving more aggressively, thinking about that house I mentioned at dinner, just something modest, maybe 2 bedrooms, a bit outside the city. Somewhere peaceful. The kind of place I never got to grow up in. Then, about 3 weeks after that argument, I got a text from my mom out of nowhere. "Hey, sweetheart, can we talk later today? Your father's been under a lot of stress. Maybe you could call." No apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what happened. Just a polite request wrapped in guilt. I stared at the message for a good 5 minutes before replying. Sure. When I called, my dad didn't pick up. Mom did. She launched straight into her usual warm but calculated tone. "Hi, honey. How are you? We haven't heard from you. I told your father you must have been busy with work." "I have been," I said. "You could have called too." She sighed like I'd just proven her point about something. "You know how stubborn your father is. He just feels disappointed. He didn't mean what he said. You know how he gets when he feels disrespected." I almost laughed. Disrespected? He told me I didn't earn my place in the family. Yes, but you know he didn't mean that literally. He was frustrated. Things have been tight around here, and he feels like he's losing control of the household. You know how men are. I bit down on my tongue so hard it almost hurt. It was the same excuse I'd heard my whole life. You know how your father is. Translation, he's allowed to hurt you as long as he feels bad later. Then she added, "Anyway, Ethan's been doing so well lately. His new business is really starting to take off. He's got 2 clients already, and one of them is some company out of Miami. Isn't that exciting?" It wasn't, but I said, "Good for him." "Oh, and he's been helping your dad around the house too. Fixing things, painting, just being such a blessing to have home again." That was the thing about my mom. She always had this way of slipping Ethan into every conversation. Like I'd forget he was the reason I'd spent most of my childhood trying to prove I was enough. I let her talk, let her gush about his newfound maturity, until finally she said what she'd really called for. "So listen," she began, her tone softening into that almost whisper she used whenever she wanted something. "We're having a small family dinner next weekend. Just the 4 of us. I think it would mean a lot if you came. Your father, well, he's been calmer lately. I think you two just need to clear the air." It was tempting to say no, but something in me wanted closure, or maybe validation. I wanted to see if there was even a chance they could treat me like a son again, not a walking ATM. So I said yes. When I pulled up to the house that Saturday, I noticed Ethan's new car parked in the driveway. A shiny black Tesla with personalized plates that read ETH1. I stood there for a second, trying not to laugh. This was the same guy who'd borrowed money from me last year to invest in crypto. Mom greeted me at the door like nothing had ever happened, hugging me a little too tightly. "Oh, honey, you look great. The city life suits you." "Thanks," I said. "Nice car out front." Her eyes lit up. "Isn't it beautiful?" Ethan finally treated himself. He deserves it after everything he's been through. I followed her inside, the smell of roast chicken and mashed potatoes filling the air. Homey, familiar, and oddly disarming. For a second, I almost felt like a kid again, before reality reminded me who I was dealing with. Dad was sitting at the head of the table, as always. He gave me a curt nod. "Nolan." "Dad." Ethan walked in a minute later, grinning like he owned the place. "Hey, city boy. Decided to bless us with your presence." I forced a smile. Figured I'd see how the family was holding up. Dinner started off fine. Small talk, some awkward laughter, Mom doing her best to keep everyone from snapping. Then, about halfway through, Dad brought up money. "So, Nolan," he said between bites, "your mother tells me you got a raise recently." "I did," I said cautiously. "Just a small one." He nodded slowly. Good, good. You've been doing well for yourself. It's good to see all that independence paying off." I could feel the but coming. "But," he continued, "you know the family's had a rough year. Your brother's been helping a lot around here, taking on responsibilities you wouldn't understand. So we thought it might be fair if everyone pitched in again. You know, just until things stabilize." I set my fork down. "You mean money?" "Not money," Mom interjected quickly. "Just support. Maybe you could cover the mortgage for a couple of months while we sort things out. Ethan's working hard to get his business running, but your father's income isn't what it used to be." I leaned back in my chair. "I already helped for months, remember? And you never paid me back." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're talking like it's a loan. Family doesn't keep score." "Funny," I said, "because I've never seen you this generous with Ethan." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Here we go? Dude, not everything's a competition." "I'm not competing," I said. "I'm asking why I'm the only one expected to sacrifice." "Because you can afford to." Mom snapped before she could stop herself. The room went dead quiet. She glanced at Dad like she wanted him to back her up, and he did, too eagerly. "You have no idea how much we've done for you," he said. "The least you can do is help us out. You wouldn't even have your job if we hadn't supported you all those years." "Supported me?" I repeated, stunned. "I paid for my own tuition, my own apartment, my own everything." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, but who raised you? Who gave you a roof to sleep under all those years? You talk like you built yourself from nothing." Something in me snapped. "You're right. I didn't build myself from nothing. I built myself in spite of you." That was it. Dad's face turned red. "You ungrateful little." He caught himself mid-sentence, looked at Mom, then back at me. "You think you're better than this family? You're not. You're just a paycheck with a name." Mom gasped softly. Ethan tried to suppress a grin. I stood up, shaking slightly but forcing myself to stay calm. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "Enjoy your Tesla, Ethan." I left again that night, but this time, something inside me hardened. The guilt, the hesitation, it all burned away. For the first time, I saw them clearly. Not as parents, not as family, but as people who would drain me dry if I let them. A few days later, Mom called again. "Nolan, honey, your father didn't mean it like that. He's just stressed. He's been dealing with the bank, and it's been complicated." "What bank?" I asked. "Oh, just mortgage stuff. Nothing to worry about. But if you could maybe help us cover this month's payment, we'd really appreciate it." And that's when I realized something was off. I'd been paying attention to their finances more closely than they thought, and I knew their mortgage renewal had been up for review. They needed stable proof of income to keep it going. I'd been listed as a co-signer on that loan years ago when they refinanced, something they'd begged me to do to get a better rate. I was young, naive, and wanted to help. But now, that leverage was mine. I didn't say anything right away. I just told Mom I'd think about it, and hung up. Then I pulled up my old financial records, the mortgage documents, everything I'd kept tucked away in a folder marked family. I spent the next few nights reading every clause, every renewal condition. And somewhere between the fine print and the late-night frustration, a plan started to take shape. A quiet, meticulous plan. They thought they could guilt me forever, that I'd keep paying just to earn a place in a family that never wanted me to begin with. But this time, I wouldn't just walk away. This time, I'd make sure they felt what it was like to lose something they took for granted. And the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. 2 weeks passed before everything started unraveling. Quietly at first, like a thread being pulled from a sweater. I went about my days normally, worked, cooked simple dinners, caught up on a few shows, and even started jogging again. But under that calm surface, I was keeping a close eye on my family's financial situation. The moment I saw their mortgage status flagged, pending review, I knew my window was opening. I hadn't planned on revenge right away. At first, it was just curiosity, a need to understand how bad things really were. But curiosity turned into clarity the moment I realized something I hadn't expected. My parents had been using my name for more than just the mortgage. It started when I got a letter from my bank saying there was unusual activity on one of my credit lines. I only had one active credit card and paid it off monthly, so I called immediately. The representative on the phone was polite but confused when I told her I didn't recognize a second card under my name, one with charges at hardware stores, car dealerships, and even a new appliance outlet. "Sir, this account was opened using your SSN and address," she explained. "It appears to have been approved jointly with an Alan Grayson, my father." I remember just sitting there, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "You're saying my father opened a credit line in my name?" "Yes, sir. The application lists you as the primary. We can start a fraud report, but I'd recommend confirming with him first in case it was a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Right. Because that's what this was. My father accidentally signing my name on a financial document and charging thousands to it. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. My chest felt tight. I wanted to call him immediately, demand an explanation, but some instinct told me not to. Instead, I drove to their house the next day, unannounced. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something new, a massive stainless steel grill gleaming on the patio, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent. Ethan was outside next to it, flipping burgers like he'd earned it. He looked up when he saw me. "Well, look who finally came around." "Where's Dad?" I asked. He shrugged. "Inside, watching the game." "What?" I didn't answer. I just walked past him, through the sliding glass door, and into the kitchen. Mom was there arranging some fruit platter, all smiles like nothing had ever happened. Nolan, this is a surprise. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone even. Can we talk? She blinked. Of course, honey. What's wrong? I got a call from the bank. They said Dad opened a credit line using my name. Her expression didn't even flicker, just a soft exhale. Oh, that. I froze. You knew? Well, she said, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. We were going to tell you eventually. It's just, the business was struggling, and your father needed a new line of credit to cover expenses. You know how slow payments can be in contracting. Mom, I said, trying to stay calm, that's fraud. You can't just use my name without asking. Oh, stop being so dramatic. You act like we stole from you. It's family money. You'll get it back. I laughed bitterly. You've been saying that for years. Before she could answer, Dad walked in, beer in hand. What's going on? I turned to him. You opened a credit account under my name? He didn't even deny it. Just took a long sip, then said, relax. I've been meaning to tell you. It's temporary. Temporary. I repeated. You spent over $8,000, Dad. He set his beer down hard enough for some to splash out. I told you before, everything I have, I built for this family. You're part of that family. So you're part of the debt, too. I felt my stomach drop. That's not how this works. You used my identity without permission. That's a crime. His eyes narrowed. You think you're going to call the cops on your own father? Go ahead. See how that looks on you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom stepped between us, her voice soft but poisonous. Nolan, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Your father's been through enough. You can't imagine the pressure he's under. And what about me? I said quietly. You think I don't have pressure? You think I don't lie awake wondering how much more you'll take before it's enough? Dad scoffed. You've had everything handed to you. Handed to me? I snapped. I paid my own way through school. I've been covering your bills for months. I've been fixing your messes while you two treat me like the problem. He stepped closer, eyes burning. Because you don't respect this family. You think money makes you better than us. You wouldn't even have credit worth using if it weren't for my name on your mortgage. And that's when it hit me, the mortgage. My name. I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. You only kept me as a co-signer so you could use my credit score to hold the house. He didn't respond. That silence told me everything. I took a step back. You really think you can just use me like that forever, don't you? Mom reached out like she could smooth over the tension with a single touch. Honey, this isn't about using anyone. We're just trying to keep the family afloat. You'll understand when you have kids of your own. That was it. That line. That patronizing, manipulative dagger I'd heard my whole life. You'll understand someday. I looked at both of them, and something inside me just switched off. The warmth, the guilt, even the anger. It all drained away, leaving only cold clarity. I'm done, I said. Mom frowned. Done with what? With this. With all of you pretending this is normal. I'm not your bank, and I'm not your scapegoat. You opened accounts in my name, you lied about the mortgage, and you've been draining me dry since college. That stops today. Dad laughed, actually laughed. You think you can just walk away from this family? You owe us. Without us, you wouldn't have. I cut him off. You're right. Without you, I wouldn't have this much resentment. I wouldn't have learned what manipulation looks like. And I sure wouldn't have learned how to protect myself. I turned and walked toward the door. He followed, shouting after me, but I didn't listen. Ethan stood outside, smirking as I passed. What? You finally done throwing your pity party? I stopped just long enough to look at him. You might want to tell Dad to start reading his mail. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? You'll find out. Then I left. That night, I filed a fraud report with the bank. It took hours, verifying documents, signing affidavits, freezing the account, but by midnight, it was done. I also called a friend of mine who worked in finance compliance and explained the situation. She told me, gently, that if my father had used my credit without consent, I had the legal right to remove myself from any joint liabilities, including the mortgage, if I could prove financial exploitation. It wasn't an easy process, but it was possible. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to power. The following week, my father called me 5 times. I didn't answer. Then Mom texted, "Why would you do this? They froze your father's account. He can't access anything." I ignored her too. But then Ethan called. "Bro, what did you do?" "Dad's losing it. He said the credit company called about an investigation." "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. I just reported fraud. He went quiet. You're really going to throw your own family under the bus? I didn't throw anyone. They jumped. He tried to guilt me, the way they all did, but I hung up before he could finish. A few days later, I checked the mortgage account. The payment was overdue. I knew what that meant. The renewal was failing. Without my credit attached, the loan was considered unstable. They'd have to reapply under my father's name alone, and given his debt load and late payments, well, I knew how that would go. Still, I wasn't prepared for how fast things would spiral. Mom showed up at my apartment one evening, first time she'd ever been there. She looked exhausted, her hair messy, makeup smudged like she'd been crying. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. "Nolan, please," she said, voice trembling. "You don't understand what you've done. The bank called. They're reviewing the mortgage. If they don't approve it, we could lose the house." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I remembered the credit card, the debt, the way she'd stood there defending him like it was nothing. "I told you to stop using me," I said. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You're punishing your father, but you're punishing me too." "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You let it happen." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "We just need your signature, that's all. One signature, and everything goes back to normal. Please, Nolan, just help us this one last time." That phrase, "one last time," it landed like a blade twisting in my chest, because I knew what it meant. It never was the last time. I shook my head. "No, I'm done." She stared at me for a long moment, disbelief and desperation flickering across her face. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll regret this." I watched her walk away, her heels echoing down the hall, each step sounding like a nail in the coffin of whatever was left of our family. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, I realized something I hadn't before. They weren't just toxic. They were entitled. They truly believed I existed to serve their comfort. But now, I had taken that comfort away. And soon, they were going to feel what it was like to lose control. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. And their biggest betrayal? That was still to come, but this time, it wouldn't be mine. The night my mom left my apartment, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in the dark, replaying every word she'd said, every look on her face. That desperate mix of fear and disappointment, it used to crush me. It used to make me fold. But this time, it just lingered, like a faint echo in a room that had finally emptied. I kept thinking, was I really the bad guy? That question haunted me for days. Because that's the thing about family. They don't have to convince you they're right. They just have to make you doubt yourself long enough to surrender. I went to work like nothing happened. Smiled when my coworkers talked about their weekend plans, nodded through meetings, even grabbed lunch with a friend who had no idea my entire family was falling apart behind the scenes. But when I got home at night, the silence was deafening. I checked my phone more times than I'd like to admit, half expecting another message from my mom, maybe even an apology. But there was nothing. Just a few missed calls from Ethan that I ignored, and one short text from my dad that said, "You made your choice. Don't come crawling back when you regret it." No punctuation, no emotion, just that cold finality. For the first time, I realized he meant it. And yet, part of me still hoped they'd come around. That they'd see how wrong it was to use me. That they'd admit what they did. But that kind of hope is poison. It keeps you tied to people who've already proven they'll drain you dry. By the end of the week, my body felt heavy all the time. Food tasted like paper. Music grated on my nerves. And every time I passed a family in the park, I felt something sink in my chest. I didn't miss them. Exactly. I missed the idea of them. The family I thought I had. The one that never really existed. Still, I wasn't ready to give up completely. Not yet. So I drove by the old house one afternoon after work, just to see how things were. The lawn was overgrown. The paint on the porch rail was chipping. Ethan's Tesla was gone, but Dad's old truck was in the driveway. Through the window, I saw my mom sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. Her shoulders slumped forward like the weight of it all was pressing down on her. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. But I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, staring at that house, wondering how something so familiar could suddenly feel so foreign. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mr. Grayson," a man's voice said. "This is Daniel Reeves from Granite Mortgage. I just wanted to confirm that you're aware your name is being removed as a guarantor on the Grayson property." My pulse quickened. "Yes, that's correct." "All right. We've been in contact with your father regarding the reassessment, but given the income discrepancy, it's unlikely they'll qualify for renewal without your credit attached. I just wanted to make sure you understand the implications. I do, I said quietly. All right then. We'll proceed with the separation. You'll receive official documentation by the end of the month. Have a good evening. When he hung up, I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. It was official now. I was out. Whatever happened next was no longer my responsibility. But that didn't make it easier to watch them fall. Over the next few weeks, I started getting bits and pieces of updates, not directly from them, but through whispers that found their way to me. My mom's cousin, who worked at the local bank, mentioned that the Graysons were in trouble. The word foreclosure floated around more than once. I tried not to care. I told myself they'd made their bed. But sometimes I'd catch myself staring at old photos. Me and Ethan as kids in the backyard, Dad at the grill, Mom laughing as she spilled lemonade on the patio, and I'd feel that ache again. Then one Friday night, around midnight, I got another call. This time, it was Ethan. I didn't want to answer. Every instinct told me to let it ring. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, got the better of me. When I picked up, his voice was slurred. You really messed us over, man. Ethan, he laughed bitterly. You think you're so smart, huh? You think this makes you better? Dad can't sleep. Mom cries all day. You did that. I didn't do anything, I said. Dad committed fraud. Ethan. Fraud. He was trying to keep us afloat. You act like we're strangers. We're your family. I was your family, I said softly. He went quiet for a second, then muttered, You'll regret this, Nolan. You always do. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at the blank screen. The anger, the sadness, it all felt like white noise now. Just static. The next morning, I decided to leave town for a few days. I took a trip up north, rented a small cabin near a lake. It wasn't fancy, no Wi-Fi, spotty cell service, but it was quiet, peaceful. I spent hours just sitting on the dock, watching the water move. For the first time in months, I felt still. I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. And underneath all of it, one truth became clear. My parents didn't just break my trust. They'd built their entire world on it. And when I pulled away, their foundation cracked. That realization hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, I didn't hate them. I just couldn't save them anymore. When I came back to the city, I felt different. Lighter, in a way. But reality was waiting. My voicemail was full, most from unknown numbers, a few from Mom, and one from a lawyer representing Granite Mortgage. The house was officially in default. They had 30 days before foreclosure proceedings began. And that's when the guilt came rushing back. Not because they deserved my help, but because part of me still wanted to. That night, I drove to the house again. It was dark, except for a single light in the living room. I could see my mom through the window, pacing back and forth on the phone. Her voice was muffled, but I caught bits of it. I don't know what to do, he won't talk to me. Yes, we've tried everything. I stayed in the car, hidden in the shadows. It was the strangest thing, watching your parents like they were strangers in a play you didn't belong to anymore. Then the porch light flicked on, and my dad stepped outside. He looked older. Not just tired, defeated. His shoulders were slumped, his hair a mess, the weight of pride and consequence written all over him. He stood there smoking a cigarette, something he hadn't done since I was a kid. I watched him exhale into the cold night, eyes fixed on nothing. I thought about getting out, walking up to him, saying something, anything. But I didn't. Because what could I say? That I was sorry? That I didn't mean for it to go this far? No. They had to learn that actions have consequences, even if it broke something in both of us. When I finally drove off, I didn't look back. Over the next few weeks, the calls slowed. The house went on the market. Ethan moved in with a friend. And my parents, well, I didn't know where they went. They just vanished from my life, like ghosts that finally gave up haunting me. And for a while, I thought that was the end of it. But one afternoon, about a month later, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. My name written in my father's handwriting. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a letter. It was a copy of the deed to the house. And across the top, scrawled in black ink, were the words, "You wanted independence. Now you have it." No signature. No address. Nothing else. I sat on the floor, holding that paper, and felt something twist inside me. Part anger, part sorrow, part finality. It was the first time I realized this wasn't just about money or betrayal. This was about control, power, pride. And though I'd taken back my power, I'd lost something else in the process. Family, even if they'd never really acted like one. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably doing the same, wondering how their son could turn on them. And maybe I was wondering the same thing about myself. Because in the end, revenge doesn't feel like victory. It feels like silence. Still, deep down, I knew this story wasn't over. Because a week later, I got another call from my mom. Her voice was trembling, panicked. "Nolan," she whispered, "why was the mortgage declined again? The bank said you had something to do with it. What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at that deed sitting on my table, the one they'd signed in their arrogance, thinking it still gave them power. "Guess the one who never earned their place," I finally said, "was paying for yours." Her breath caught on the other end. And that's when I realized they still hadn't hit rock bottom. But they were about to. When the phone call ended that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel relieved. Just empty. My mom's panicked voice echoed in my head, twisting between guilt and something darker, something close to satisfaction. I told myself it wasn't revenge. It was justice. Consequence. Balance finally restored after years of being the one they leaned on, manipulated, and guilted into silence. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had taken back control. The following months were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like standing in the aftermath of an explosion. No sound, just dust settling over everything. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not a word. No calls. No letters. Not even a rumor through family friends. Ethan had blocked me on everything. I assumed they all blamed me, painted me as the ungrateful son who turned on his family. But I didn't try to defend myself. I had spent too long explaining my pain to people who didn't care to understand it. Instead, I focused on building something new. I poured my energy into work. At first, it was just a distraction, numbers, reports, deadlines, but then something shifted. Without the emotional weight of my family dragging behind me, I was sharper, faster, more decisive. I stopped second-guessing myself in meetings. I spoke up more, and people noticed. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. "Nolan," he said, leaning back in his chair with that serious but pleased expression bosses get when they're about to say something big. "You've been killing it lately. I mean, really. Your numbers are the highest on the team." "Thanks," I said cautiously. "I've just been focused." He smiled. "Well, keep that focus. Because we're opening a new branch downtown, and I think you'd be perfect to help lead the transition. It's a pay bump and a step up in management responsibilities." I blinked. "Wait, you mean a promotion?" "Exactly. Think about it, and let me know by the end of the week." I didn't need to think. I accepted the next day. That promotion changed everything. The salary jump was significant, enough to finally start looking at real estate again, but this time, for me. Not to help anyone else. Not to prove anything. Just to build something of my own. I found a condo overlooking the river, modern and simple, with just enough space to breathe. Signing that lease felt symbolic, like closing one door and finally walking through another without looking back. I started working out again, too. Nothing crazy, just small routines. Jogging in the mornings, cooking real meals instead of takeout, journaling at night to clear my head. The more I poured into myself, the less I thought about them. Slowly, the bitterness began to fade. It didn't vanish. Those scars run deep, but it dulled. Enough for me to start thinking about the future without their voices echoing in it. But the world has a funny way of circling back. It was a Friday in early spring when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Caldwell, our old neighbor. She spotted me outside a cafe downtown, holding a cup of coffee and squinting like she was seeing a ghost. "Nolan," she said, smiling. "Goodness, it is you. You look so grown up." I smiled politely. "Hey, Mrs. Caldwell. It's been a while." "Oh, it certainly has." She lowered her voice, as though gossip were an Olympic sport. "I ran into your mother a few weeks ago. She mentioned you moved to the city." I hesitated. "Yeah, I did." She didn't say much else. I could tell she's been going through a rough time. "They lost the house, didn't they?" My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Yeah." She said they were renting a small place out by the highway now. Not the same, of course, but she said they're managing. Managing. That word again. the one they'd used for years as a mask for chaos. I thanked her for the chat, then went about my day. But that conversation stuck with me. Not out of guilt, out of curiosity. I hadn't thought about where they'd gone after the foreclosure. And even though I had no reason to check, something in me wanted to know. Maybe I needed to see what managing looked like without me holding it together. So one weekend, I drove out there. The address wasn't hard to find. Just a small single-story rental near the edge of town. The kind of place with fading paint, patchy grass, and a mailbox leaning slightly to one side. It was strange seeing them live like that. Not because of the downgrade, but because for the first time, they were living within their means. Through the window, I saw my mom folding laundry while my dad sat at the table reading something, probably bills. The sight should have made me feel vindicated, but instead, it just made me feel human. They looked like ordinary people. Flawed, aging, maybe even humbled. I didn't knock. I just watched for a minute, then drove away. That night, I wrote in my journal, freedom isn't peace at first. It's silence. Peace comes later, when you stop expecting the noise to return. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Over the next year, things kept getting better. My promotion turned into a permanent leadership role. I managed a team of 10, got invited to conferences, and started mentoring younger analysts. I became that guy at work, the one who always had things together, calm under pressure. If only they knew the chaos it took to get here. Financially, I was stable for the first time in my life. I invested carefully, started a small savings account specifically for long-term goals, and even began contributing to a charity that helped kids from low-income families attend college. Maybe it was my way of rewriting the past, helping someone like me who didn't have anyone to fall back on. Then, one morning, I got an email from a familiar name, Granite Mortgage. At first, I thought it was spam. But when I opened it, I realized it was a notification regarding the final closure of the Grayson family account. It confirmed that the property had been repossessed and resold. The remaining balance, after liquidation, was fully cleared, no debts remaining on my end. It was officially over. I stared at that email for a long time. It didn't feel like victory, not exactly. It felt clean. Final. Like erasing the last line of a chapter you never want to read again. I celebrated that night. Nothing crazy, just a quiet dinner alone at a nice restaurant, a glass of wine, a view of the city lights reflecting on the water. The waiter asked if I was celebrating something special. Yeah, I said with a small smile. Closure. He nodded like he understood. But as life tends to do, just when things start feeling stable, it throws you a test. A few weeks later, I was at work when I got a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't recognize the area code, but something about it tugged at me. I waited until after lunch to listen. It was my mom. Her voice was softer this time, almost fragile. Hi, Nolan, it's me. I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but your dad's not well. He's been different lately. He doesn't talk much. I think losing the house broke something in him. I just thought you should know. I replayed that message 3 times. Each time, my stomach knotted tighter. I didn't know whether to feel angry, guilty, or indifferent. Maybe all 3. I didn't call her back. Not yet. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting to the image of my father sitting at that table, quiet, defeated. The man who once slammed his fist and told me I hadn't earned my place, now apparently silent in a small rental with nothing left to his name. And here I was, successful, free, finally at peace. It should have felt like balance. But instead, it felt like standing on a cliff, looking down at everything you climbed past, realizing the fall doesn't scare you anymore. But what's left behind still does. A week later, I ran into Ethan. It was pure coincidence. We both happened to be at the same coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked rough, unshaven, tired, thinner. He spotted me across the room, hesitated, then walked over. Nolan, he said quietly. Ethan. He sat down without asking. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Dad's sick. I stayed quiet. It's his heart, he continued. Doctor says it's serious. Mom's been trying to reach you. But, well, you never answer. I got her message. He looked at me, eyes hollow. You really hate us that much? I sighed. I don't hate you. I just stopped letting you hurt me. He rubbed his temples. We lost everything, man. You got what you wanted. No, I said softly. I got what I needed. There's a difference. He didn't respond. Just sat there, staring into his coffee like it held the answer to everything that went wrong. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. "You're lucky, you know. You got out before the ship sank." I watched him go, his shoulders slumped, his whole body radiating defeat. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt sorry. Because while they'd spent their lives chasing control, I'd learned the power of letting go. I'd risen, not by climbing over them, but by stepping away from the wreckage they built. And as I stood there, watching the world move around me, I realized something simple yet profound. The real revenge wasn't their downfall. It was my peace. But peace, as I was about to learn, doesn't always last forever. Because just when I thought the story had ended, my mom showed up at my door again. And this time, she wasn't alone. After she showed up on my doorstep that evening, small, polite, clutching a casserole like nothing in the last year had happened, I realized there was no point pretending anymore. She sat on my couch and watched my apartment like a guest in someone else's life, waiting for crumbs of pity. I let her talk for a while, about Dad's doctor appointments, about how proud she still was of Ethan trying to rebuild, about how they were learning to be careful with money now. All of it sounded like gaslight with better lighting. While she talked, I did something I'd been delaying for months. I opened the folder called Family Paperwork and slid it across the coffee table. She paled when she saw it. Inside were copies of every mortgage statement, every surprise bill that had appeared on my credit, the bank fraud report I'd filed, emails from Granite Mortgage, and a little stack of photos, receipts for the grill, the Tesla registration, invoices with their signatures. It was boring, bureaucratic evidence, the kind that turns vague moral complaints into concrete things you can hand to a person and say, "This is what you did." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You asked why the mortgage was declined," I said. "This is why. And it's not just about money. It's about trust. You used me. You lied to me. You treated me like a tool, not a son." She kept fumbling for the right response. Apology, blame, explanation, but none came. Instead, she reached for the sympathy card. We were desperate. I watched her mouth that word and remembered all the times desperate had been used to excuse other people's choices while the consequences landed on me. That night, I made the rest of the calls I'd been planning. I called the compliance officer at the credit company and confirmed I had full documentation for the fraud claim. I set up a consultation with a small law firm that handled consumer protection and elder financial abuse. I emailed a reporter who had covered local foreclosure stories in the past, but I didn't send anything yet, just a line in the subject. Potential story, documentation available. I also reached out to a friend who ran a small community Facebook group where everyone from town still read the feed. He owed me a favor, and I knew he'd at least look if I asked him to. This was the setup. Build indisputable proof, secure legal backing, and then make the consequences visible in places that mattered to them. The bank, their neighbors, the little social circles where prestige still did the heavy lifting. I wanted it to be clean, not cruel. I wanted the record to show why they'd lost what they'd lost, not just to humiliate them, but to protect myself from any future attempts to drag me back in. 2 days later, after the lawyer reviewed everything and told me we had a very strong case for identity theft and for rescinding any remaining obligations tied to my name, I made the decision to go public, but carefully. I compiled a single PDF, timeline, scanned documents, photos, the bank's fraud confirmation, and a short, factual summary of events. No rhetoric, no melodrama, just dates, transactions, and signatures. I scheduled 2 emails to go out, one to Granite Mortgage and 2 compliance offices, so everything was on the record, and one to the local reporter with the subject line unchanged. I also prepared a post for the community group, short, factual, and stripped of vengeance language, because town gossip could be brutal in ways the law could not. It would make their neighbors ask questions, and it would close doors that feeds and favors had kept open before. My finger hovered over the send button longer than I expected. For a second, I thought about backing out, about not being the person who made other people's hardships public. But then I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up fixing problems that weren't mine, about the way they laughed when I tried to explain boundaries, and I let my hand fall. I hit send. The email to the bank got an automatic reply. The reporter opened the attachments within an hour and sent a 2-line confirmation that they would look into it. The community post got 1 comment almost immediately. "Mrs. Caldwell, so sorry to hear this. I'll share. Within an afternoon, the small world ripples started. By evening, my phone buzzed with a call from a lawyer at the firm who said, very plainly, they'll respond, Nolan. Expect pushback. Expect attempts to gaslight you again. We'll be ready. I felt the familiar tightness creep in, anticipatory, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Then the doorbell rang. I walked to the door, and for a beat, I debated whether to answer. I wasn't sure if it would be Mom again, or Ethan, or someone from the bank wielding paperwork. I braced myself, palms damp on the doorknob, because I remembered how quickly their faces could flip from pleading to angry, and I knew whatever was waiting on the porch would change the next chapter. I opened the door and stopped cold. Standing on the porch that night, I stared at the man in front of me, my father. He looked nothing like the one who used to fill a room with his voice. His clothes hung loose, his face hollow, and his eyes carried that flicker of shame that pride never fully kills. He didn't say anything at first, just held out a folded newspaper. The front page headline made my chest tighten. Local contractor under investigation for financial misconduct. There it was. His name. His company. My family's empire of borrowed trust finally collapsing in daylight. You did this, he said quietly. Not angry, just tired. No, I said. You did. He laughed once, a dry, broken sound. You think they'll see you as the hero? You ruined your own family. I didn't ruin it, I said. I stopped pretending it was real. He didn't reply. He just turned, stepped off the porch, and walked to the street where an old sedan idled. Mom sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. For a second, I thought he might look back, might say something human, apology, regret, anything. But he didn't. The car rolled away slowly, headlights dim against the dark. Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread fast. The fraud case hit the local papers, and the bank froze what was left of their accounts. Ethan's name appeared in the documents too, listed as a beneficiary of unauthorized funds. His little consulting gig vanished overnight. Their social circle, the one they'd spent years curating with charm and borrowed money, dissolved instantly. People stopped returning calls. Contracts dried up. The town that once called my father self-made now whispered a different word, disgraced. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went on with my life. Work thrived. My condo became a home. I even started mentoring kids who wanted to learn about finance. Kids like me who thought independence meant isolation. I told them it doesn't. It means choosing who gets to stay in your life. One night, months later, I got a letter. Handwritten. My mom's neat cursive across the front. Inside was a single page. We lost everything. Your father doesn't talk much anymore. I hope you're happy. I still think of you every day. No apology. Just that. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer where I kept the old mortgage papers, the ones I'd refused to destroy. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A week later, I drove past the house. Not their new rental, the old house. The one with my name once printed on its mortgage papers. It sat empty now, windows dark, grass tall and unkept. A for sale sign leaned in the yard, weather-worn and half-fallen. I parked for a moment, looking at the home that used to define us. Then I smiled, not out of revenge, but peace. Because I finally understood something simple and brutal. Sometimes the only way to rebuild is to let what's rotten collapse. As I drove away, the first rays of morning hit the broken glass on the porch, and for a second, it glittered like something new. And I thought, the house may have fallen apart, but so did their illusion. Then I whispered to myself, with the kind of calm that only comes after surviving a storm. Guess the one who never earned his place was the only one keeping it standing.